There are few tactics in the theist arsenal more tiring than, well, you're just like me, so there. We've seen it all trotted out all the time, but it never works out well for the religious because it simply isn't true. So let's start a new series of sorts where we evaluate that for at least one claim. Doesn't that sound like fun? I think so, so stay tuned. This is the beginning of a long series of videos from a channel called JCO Journey. Now, I'm not going to be doing these every single week because that would be annoying. It's going to be more like whenever the hell I get around to it, maybe once a month, once every couple weeks, I don't know. But I'm going to go ahead and treat these like a Daniel King video and stop in every couple of weeks just to keep things interesting. JCO seems to think that atheists have a burden of proof, and at the moment, I've got 9 videos to get through, so let's go look at the first one and see what's what.
Atheists have a burden of proof. It's as simple as that.
Now, I know I'm jumping in here quickly without giving him an opportunity to explain. He will be able to do that in a second, but I just want to set this up properly. The burden of proof is gained when an individual makes a positive claim about a given topic. If you say, yes, X is true, or no, X is not true, then it's on your shoulders to show why that claim is actually correct. If you say, in my opinion, X is true, then you don't necessarily have a burden of proof because you are not stating that something is actually factually the case, only that in your view it is. And yes, your view can be wrong, and you really should be able to back it up, and nobody actually has to take your opinion seriously, so there is that. But I know that there are people out there who use that to get around supporting their own claims, and that is inherently dishonest, and people really ought to be able to back up why their opinions are valid. I just really wanted to get to the point where we understand that the burden of proof comes with positive claims. Not opinions necessarily, but positive claims. If you don't make a positive claim about something, you do not have the burden of proof. But we'll get further into this as we go on, I'm sure, so let's just get back to the video.
Liar.
Well, yeah, it's pretty clear that someone doesn't understand the burden of proof. So let me continue to explain just to get this all out of the way up front. Keep in mind that this is kind of this guy's entire shtick. Most videos on his channel, at least the ones I've looked at, are trying to force the burden of proof on atheists to the point that it's clear that he doesn't understand the concept. Anyhow, as I was saying, you have the burden of proof whether you like it or not. If you don't want it, then don't make positive claims. Atheists, at least most atheists, at least not in my experience, they don't make positive claims. We do not say that God's absolutely positively for absolute certain don't exist. That would be a positive claim, and that would incur a burden of proof. This is why the whole opinion thing often gets used. Someone will say, well, God isn't real. Great, well, how the hell do you know that? You have the burden of proof. And then they'll come back with, well, it's just my opinion. Okay, but that doesn't really change anything, does it? You should be able to justify your opinion. If you can't do that, then you shouldn't be putting your opinion out there. And again, that's just kind of my position on it. There is a lot of wiggle room here, but I don't think you should be able to use your opinion as a way to get out of the burden of proof because it doesn't really work. There's really a big difference between saying, in my opinion, God isn't real, and saying, in my opinion, I really like chocolate ice cream. One is making a statement about actual reality. One is making a statement about your own preferences. They aren't really comparable, so we have to keep that in mind as well. There's a whole lot more to go into, of course, but we'll have to see where JCO goes next.
When talking about the existence of a God, a common misconception is that only the theist holds the burden of proof.
No, it's the positive claimant, no matter what side they're on. Theists are saying that a god or gods, depending on the religion, are actually real. We have every right to ask them how they know that, and faith and fifis are not adequate answers. Now, that doesn't obligate you to answer. Intellectually, you should, but lots of people are not intellectual in their arguments. The person asking you to back up your claims will not be impressed or convinced by your lack of corroboration and will thus just walk away and think you're a loon. That's fair. It isn't like there's a jail somewhere that you get put into if you fail to meet your burden of proof. People will just think you're stupid. Yet this is why so many theists try to shift the burden of proof, as I suspect this guy is going to be doing, because they simply cannot meet their own burden and they don't want other people to think they're irrational and dumb, even though in a lot of cases they are. So they put on this production and pretend they don't have a burden of proof, or they try to distract by screaming, "Look over there," while they silently run away. And I'm sorry, I'll tell you right now, it just doesn't work that way. You look dumb if you fail. And a lot of these people just fail. So let's just go get back to JCO.
However, atheists may also bear this responsibility. This idea might surprise some, but it's essential to understand that in any rational discourse, anyone making a claim may need to back it up.
Yes, but it has to be a positive claim. X is true or X is not true. And in my opinion, you know how that goes, it has to be a claim about reality, about something outside of your own head. Anyone who makes a positive assertion must back it up to be considered credible. Saying, "Well, I didn't like that movie," or "I like chocolate ice cream," those aren't positive assertions about the world. They're just statements of preference. If you say, "I prefer if there is a God," yeah, okay, whatever. That's not making a positive statement about the state of objective reality. It's just saying, "I like it." Sure, whatever you say. I don't care. Now, I'll just get on about my day and pay you and your preferences no more mind because they're really irrelevant to anything of any validity. Now, you note that he says may, not does, may. I can certainly see in some circumstances where that can be true. The aforementioned atheists who do make positive claims about the existence of God, but that's a relatively small percentage of atheists in my experience, and his series isn't "Some atheists may have the burden of proof," because I would absolutely agree with that. And if anybody's been watching the channel for any amount of time, I call atheists who do make positive claims in the comments out on their positive claims. And so far, at least, every single one has failed to meet their burden of proof. So, some probably do deserve to be called out for it. I don't think it's a lot, but some certainly do. So what?
The purpose of the series is simple: to explain what burden of proof is, and to demonstrate that atheists may have to provide a burden of proof if they want to hold their position irrational by others, or at least themselves.
We'd have to see the specifics because the devil is in the details, and it seems a bit strange to make your entire channel, or close to it, about this one very specific topic. I see this in a lot of theists who just use it as a dodge to avoid their own burden because they simply cannot meet it. So let's do some more explanation since he at least hints at it. Any positive position has an inherent burden of proof, and anyone can ask for it at any time, even if it's a mundane claim. There's no floor beyond which people aren't allowed to ask. If you say you have a dog, people can ask you to see pictures of your dog. If you refuse to provide one or haul the dog out for examination, then people are free to reject your claim. There's no standard here. It's just what people want to insist on support for, And that goes for the individual as well. I get to choose what I demand evidence for, not you. You have no say in the matter. And that seems to confuse a lot of people.
By understanding this concept, we can ensure that discussions about the belief and disbelief of the non-existence or existence of a God remains fair and intellectually honest. Understanding the burden of proof is crucial for maintaining rational and productive conversations.
I agree. We just need to see some examples because I'm willing to bet that there's a whole lot more shifting of the goalposts here than he'd be willing to admit to. Even if atheists, some atheists, have a burden of proof, that doesn't do away with your own burden over your own positive claims. And that's something that I have to continually explain. Pointing fingers at others doesn't remove your own burden to back up your own claims. You need to do that regardless. So saying, well, they aren't proving theirs doesn't mean you don't have to prove yours. So this is really kind of silly, especially in an extended series, because I'm not seeing him or really any other theist backing up their own claims with anything remotely resembling evidence. So much of this is just, well, you can't prove me wrong, so I just have to be right. And I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that way.
Without it, discussions can become one-sided and unbalanced. By acknowledging that both theists and atheists have responsibilities in these discussions, if they choose to have these discussions, we can create a more respectful and intellectually honest dialogue.
Except you just shifted your own assertions. It started out with atheists may, and now he's at atheists do. And I'm sorry, but that's not how that works. This is incredibly common, though, as you might imagine, because they are trying to avoid meeting their own burdens by insisting that people who aren't making any positive claims at all suddenly share the burdens themselves. And that is not how this works. I have zero burden at all if I do not make a positive claim. In this specific instance, if I don't say gods do not exist, I have no burden to show that they don't. This is why you will never, ever, 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 ever see me saying that. Go through any of my videos. I don't think you'll ever find a single instance where I've ever made a positive claim about the existence of any god. I mean, I guess I could say that Bobo the tree god doesn't exist, but that's because I just made it up. There really was a tree once upon a time, at least until it got blown over in a windstorm, but the god part of it, that was never real. I invented it. I'm not crazy enough to believe that Bobo, as an actual god, ever existed. Beyond that, though, you're not going to find any positive claims about gods coming from me, because I have no burden of proof.
In this series, I'll try to delve deeper into what burden of proof entails, how it applies to both theists and atheists, why it's a fundamental aspect of rational discourse, and among other things. And I ask you to stay tuned as I explain my reasoning on these concepts, and I try to bring more clarity on this often misunderstood topic.
Most of the misunderstandings that I see come from the religious side. Yes, I have to explain things to some atheists too, but mostly it's a defense mechanism used by the religious to get to, but I really, really want it to be true. But that doesn't make it true, does it? So we'll go through his examples, which sound like they're coming in future videos, and that's completely fine. But we still see the religious insisting things because it says so in the Bible, or because it makes sense to me, or because I have the witness of the Holy Spirit and I hear voices in my head, or whatever, none of which are actually supported by any evidence. And that makes it kind of stupid. Just because you really believe it, just because you have faith in it, just because you really like it, that doesn't make it true. We spend a whole lot of time playing these ridiculous word games with these people, and it's not doing anyone a bit of good, is it?
Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Like or dislike, and comment how you feel.
You know, this was going to be a relatively short video, but this was just an introduction. So I'm just going to jump into his second video too. So far, this sounds sort of reasonable, except for his jump from may have a burden to do have a burden. This is why it's so important to pay attention to the actual words that they use and not just let them rush past to get where they want to go. Words matter. So let's just jump to part 2.
A phrase I often hear is that the theist has to provide the burden of proof. Let's be clear, both atheists and theists bear the burden of proof for their claims.
Yes, if the atheist is actually making a positive claim, which in most cases they are not. Everyone bears the burden of proof for claims they actually make, not for claims the other side asserts that they're making. Now, I can only judge this on my own because I only get to speak for me, but so much of this typically is talking past your interlocutor and asserting things about them that aren't actually so. So I guess we'll just have to see where this goes. If the atheist is not actually making a positive claim, in this case about any gods, then they do not have any burden of proof. Learn to deal.
You serious?
Well, duh.
Except that is true. No positive claims means no burden of proof. I am not convinced by your claim is not a claim in and of itself. This is where the religious often go wrong because they can't imagine that everyone isn't just like they are. But we're not. We are reporting our reaction to whatever it is that you said. That is not in and of itself a claim. We're not saying you're wrong, or at least I'm not, and if I do, then I do have the burden of proof to back it up. Just because you want there to be a claim, that doesn't mean that there is one. Just because you interpret it as a claim, that doesn't make it one either. This is where the religious go wrong a lot. Big surprise there.
This principle is rooted in philosophical definitions of these terms and even in the lack-theist terms, which we'll explore later.
Which is immediately where he's going wrong. You don't get to just assign positions to other people against their will. This is where philosophers get into trouble. You're welcome to invent a definition for you to use within your own specific circles, but out here in the real world, you don't get to tell others what they believe. Language is descriptive, not prescriptive. It describes how terms are actually used in reality by individuals, not how people must use them or else. Most atheists lack belief in gods. You telling them that they actually believe there are no gods is dishonest. This comes about a lot too because my book says a thing, and we don't care about your book. This is just the religious desperately trying to get back to their own emotionally comforting beliefs, and nobody outside of your little cult cares. So, speaking for myself, I am not convinced that any gods exist. I'm not stating that no gods exist. I don't care if you like that. Fuck you and fuck philosophy, because nobody gives a shit.
Throughout history, both theist and atheist philosophers have presented arguments to support their respective positions.
Which is great. My position is that no evidence has convinced me that the existence of gods is even a coherent concept, much less a demonstrated fact. I have no arguments to present because I have made no positive claims. I am only asking for your evidence because you are making the positive statement that gods are real, or at least the God you believe in is real. So, back it up. Of course, they can't, and that's the whole problem, because if they can't do it, they shouldn't believe it either. They shouldn't be basing their entire life around things that they have no corroboratory evidence to present. I've got nothing to support in this because I'm not taking a positive position on anything at all. I'm saying I don't believe you. That's it.
Theist philosophers like Thomas Aquinas and William Craig have provided robust arguments for the existence of a God.
No, they haven't. They have made complete fools of themselves and made faith claims that they simply cannot back up intellectually. If he was going to expect us to be anything like Craig, atheists would be saying, well, gods aren't real because I have the witness of the holy intellect or something stupid like that. We are not saying that, and that's what the religious really want. They want everyone to be just like they are so they don't have to pony up any proof for their beliefs. Except that's not how this works, is it?
On the other hand, atheist philosophers like Richard Dawkins and Graham Opie have offered compelling arguments against the non-existence of a God or the existence of no God, or something like that.
Good for them. I am not them. I have no burden of proof whatsoever. In fact, you won't find me making any arguments against the existence of any gods because I am not making any positive claims. I am simply unconvinced by the claims and the arguments offered by the religious. Thus, I do not believe. Lack of belief is not a belief in the lack of gods. Learn to deal with reality. He's trying so hard to get to his point, but his point is ultimately stupid. Anyone can watch his video on YouTube. It's an open public platform, and he's really only trying to talk the already religious into believing this because it provides emotional comfort. It doesn't provide any factual reality, and that's what he needs. So I can already see this going completely off the rails, but hey, let's just keep going. I suspect it won't be long until he tries telling atheists what it is they really believe, entirely without consulting us. How long do you think that's going to take? Place your bets down in the comments.
Both sides have engaged deeply with the burden of proof. It's important to understand that the statement, the theist has to provide the burden of proof, is misleading.
No, it's not. Theists do have to provide the burden of proof because they are the ones making positive claims. Atheists, by and large at least, are not. He's just trying to shove all of us into the same box and say, well, because those guys over there do X, you do it too. No, I don't. I don't at all. You don't get to generalize about all atheists because you really wish we were all the same. But that's all he's really doing here, isn't it? It's why he's just making a fool of himself, as if that's any surprise.
Theists, in general, have already provided the burden of proof through various arguments and evidence.
No, you haven't. You have made claims. You have not backed them up sufficiently, and certainly not enough to convince atheists that you have the slightest clue what the hell you're talking about. Your arguments and claimed evidence are crap. Just because it convinces you, that doesn't mean it's going to convince us, because our standards are simply higher. We are not running on pure fifis and faith as the religious near universally are. Or at least I haven't run into anyone on the religious side that isn't, and if you are, let me know down in the comments because I'd like to have a conversation with you. I've been on a years-long search for a single theist or apologist or anybody who can set their faith aside and just deal with the demonstrable facts, and those people don't seem to exist. You haven't remotely met your burden of proof. You just really want to believe. But wanting to believe simply isn't enough.
However, whether an individual accepts this as proof that God exists is a different matter altogether.
You're right. You are absolutely right. Because the judge of the proof is the person wanting to be convinced, not the person who already believes. You're the one on my doorstep trying to tell me the good news. If you can't convince me of the rational veracity of any of it, then you've failed. Now, you don't have to care if I'm convinced or not, even though you've got the Great Commission. Matthew 28:18-20 doesn't tell you to go out and try to make disciples of all nations. It says to do it, not give it your best shot. Do it. And if you can't do it, you've failed. And sadly for the religious, they fail a whole lot more than they succeed. Apologists just make endless excuses for why they fail because I think they understand that in the modern world where standards of evidence are much, much higher and expectations are much more strenuous, that religion simply cannot rise to the challenge. They understand that failure is going to be a whole lot more common than success. More and more, it's near universal that they fail. And that says some pretty negative things about your religion, doesn't it? If it's that unconvincing to everyone around you, then maybe you're on the wrong side of reality. Maybe you ought to go and think about that some, because you are.
This distinction is crucial. Providing the burden of proof and accepting it are two separate issues. Both can be true simultaneously, especially in the case of philosophical discussions. Recognizing that both theists and atheists bear the burden of proof for their claims is essential for a fair and balanced discourse.
And there it is. I knew it was coming because the religious always give it a shot. It's not fair. They're not looking for honesty. They're not looking for reality. They just want things to be fair. But in the real world, fairness is rarely a thing. This is expecting fairness and not consistency. But consistency is all that matters. Anyone who makes a positive claim has the burden of proof to back it up. If you don't want to or can't, then stop making positive claims. Stop wandering the streets telling everyone that you pass that Godzilla is ravishing the city if you can't back it up. That's just common sense. If you can't support it, shut up. Of course, the religious can't do that. They're commanded to spread the word, even if the word is nonsense, and therefore they wind up feeling really, really bad about their constant failures. But that's your problem, not ours. Stop trying to rope us into your nonsense because we're not going to play that game. We're making no claims whatsoever. We have no burden of proof. You've got the rope and you're busy constructing the gallows, and that's nobody's fault but your own. We don't have to hang with you. We're doing what rational consistency demands. We don't care about fair because fair doesn't matter. We care about truth. Maybe you should give that a try.
Without this mutual understanding, discussions can become lopsided, with one side unfairly expected to justify their position while the other side remains unchallenged.
Because we've made no positive claims. It's always going to come down to this. If you want to debate the people making positive claims, feel free. Go find them, because that's not me, nor is it the overwhelming majority of atheists. We're just not. We are not making the claims that you want to project onto us. If you want to address your video series specifically to Gnostic atheists, go right ahead. You're going to get very little response because there really aren't a lot of those out there. But sure, nobody's going to complain if you do. However, by trying to insist that everyone is a Gnostic atheist, that is simply not the case. You're just proving just how dishonest and disingenuous you are, or how ignorant you are, take your pick. And that's not going to fly. We're still not doing what you're claiming we're doing, and we're still not concerned about fair. We're in it for the facts, and the facts simply do not support your side of the argument or your claims. We can't stop you from believing, and we're not trying to do so regardless, but you're still not convincing us. You're still failing in the Great Commission. That's a you problem, not an us problem. Maybe you should do something about it.
By acknowledging the shared responsibility, we can foster more meaningful and productive conversations about the existence of a God. In future videos, I'll try to discuss what the burden of proof is a little more in depth, but understanding these principles is a key to engaging in rational and respectful debates and discussions. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next installment of the series.
Sorry, but this is pretty much where I expected it to go. Keep in mind, I don't watch these things ahead of time, so I went into it just as blind as you did. Well, unless you saw some of these before, then I don't know what to tell you. So we'll come back probably with 2 more videos if they're all about the same length. I don't know, I haven't looked. In a couple of weeks, maybe a month, because I can't imagine that this is going to get any more fascinating. He's just trying to frame atheists in a way that isn't intellectually honest, because I'm sure he's tired of being on the hot seat all the time. A place that he put himself by choice, so he wants us to sit on the stove and simmer too. But no, we're not going to do that because we're not just like he is. We are not making positive claims about gods, at least by and large. And for the people who are, yeah, go ahead, have at them. That's fine. They've put themselves in the crosshairs, and you are welcome to go after them if you'd like, because I'll be right there with you. But I'm not doing that, and I have no burden of proof to discharge. I just don't. If you asked a wide variety of atheists, hell, go down, ask everybody in the comments, feel free, if they are making any positive claims that gods don't exist, the vast majority would say, nope. Okay, there are a few, that's fine. You go talk to those people, but there you go. Problem solved. Theists who are making that positive claim, they have the burden of proof. And the vast majority of atheists who are not, don't. Thanks for playing. Of course, that won't be the end of this, will it? And I looked and I see that he's now up to 11 videos in the series, and who knows if we're going to get that far. If he starts to get boring, I'm going to stop. You can let me know down in the comments how it feels, but we can go on for a little bit and just see how it goes. I just don't think it's going to be that impressive. I think it's going to be a desperation move toward fairness, and I really want you to be just like me, and that's not going to be impressive, is it? The burden of proof, it's an odd topic, especially for a theist to focus on, but that's what we're in for today. Won't that be fun? Yeah, probably not, but it has to be done because the religious, they don't want to understand where they're going wrong, and they're going wrong a lot. So let's get to it, coming up next. This one would have shown up a little earlier if I hadn't had catastrophic technical problems and lost all my scripts, but hey, it comes when it comes, right? We're returning to JCO Journey and his rather fanatical claims that atheists have a burden of proof, which demonstrably they don't. At least most don't. He clearly doesn't understand, so let's go see if we can tear this down and show where he's wrong. Not that I suspect he cares or anything, but we have to at least try, so let's go do that.
Now let me be clear. In the past, I created videos detailing that atheism is best described as the belief that there is no God.
It doesn't matter what you like, it matters what the individuals who self-identify as atheists actually believe. This is something that tends to be difficult for the religious to handle, mostly because I think they're used to being told what they are from the top, and most things in life don't work that way. Nobody gets to tell me my favorite flavor of ice cream. I get to make that decision on my own. You have absolutely no part in that decision. The religious have problems separating what they want the world to be from what the world actually is. You don't get to tell me what I believe, no matter how much you really wish that you did or how much you believe that it's true. So let's get that out of the way right up front. It doesn't matter what you think atheism should mean. It matters only what self-identified atheists say that it means to them. So with that out of the way, please continue.
Following the philosophical definition used in academia.
Fuck academia. They have a lot of similar problems to the religious. They seem to think that they're an authority, and they're not. Now, if they want to say, for the sake of internal discussions, we're going to define this word in this way to keep things clear and consistent in our own discussions, I've got no problem with that. Knock yourself out. However, there is a very real distinction to make between things you do for your own personal convenience and clarity and what is actually true in the outside world. Because the second you lost that distinction, you get people like JCO here who think that's actually what the world means, and that's not how that works, is it? I get to define myself any damn way I please, and you have no say in the matter whatsoever. No one does. If you want to know what I mean by atheism, ask me. Just as if I want to know what you mean by Christianity, I'm going to ask you. I don't just get to assume that this is what you mean. I have to ask what you personally, individually mean by the words that you use. Because that's how rational conversations happen. And nobody cares if you like it or not.
While I still believe this is the most precise way to define atheism, For this discussion, I will include the popular definition among certain self-proclaimed atheists, the lack of belief that there is a God.
You don't have a choice. This is another thing that a lot of people, not just theists, think is that they get to define what other people think because that's what they really want it to be. But that's not how that works. Atheism is specifically the lack of belief in gods. A is without. Theos is gods. Atheism is literally the lack of belief in gods. Do the Greek. This is something that I see all the time. Who knows if he's going to go there, but a lot of modern theists, they seem to think that this is something new, and it's not. This is pretty much the definition atheists have given their atheism since time immemorial. What we tend to see from history is how the religious have defined atheism, not how atheists have done it themselves. Mostly, the atheists were trying not to get their asses killed by the religious, and they didn't have a lot of time to sit there and debate definitions with the people who were out to kick their asses. This isn't something new, and it isn't something out of the ordinary. This is just what atheism is. It is the state of not being a theist. Just ask atheists if you want to know the real truth. Of course, they don't want to know the real truth, do they? Wonder why?
I mean, it still wouldn't matter which definition you choose, because despite the different definitions, both positions still carry a burden of proof.
And neither one actually does, unless the specific atheist makes positive claims about the existence of any gods. Repeating your own demonstrably wrong position over and over and over again doesn't make that position right. I have a feeling this whole series is going to come down to this problem specifically, and I'm already predicting it's why this thing is going to short circuit, because just saying dumb stuff again and again and again isn't a basis for just repeating the same "you're just wrong" after every attempt. He has a fundamental misunderstanding of the burden of proof. Lots of theists do. Lots of people do. That's really my purpose in doing this at all, to try to hammer home just how wrong they are. Not that I think anyone really expects them to care. The reason that they're doing it, I think, and anyone who disagrees is certainly welcome to correct me down in the comments, is that they desperately want to get off the hot seat that they have voluntarily put themselves on. It's an attempt to shift the burden of proof away from themselves and to make themselves happy. And no, that's not going to work either.
Previously in my videos, which argued that atheism is best understood as the belief that there is no God, were not well received by some viewers who admits not watching them while strawmanning my position. I stand by this definition because it aligns with the philosophical and academic understanding of the word atheism.
Then you don't understand how words work either. Now, that's not that hard to understand because a lot of people simply don't. Definitions are prescriptive, not descriptive. A dictionary doesn't describe what words mean, it lists how words are used. That's why definitions change over time, because people use words in different ways. And as more people start to use these words in a new or novel way, the dictionaries will change their definition to reflect those new usages. They will mark old usages that have fallen out of favor as archaic. So you're already in trouble because you don't get how language operates. And like I said, a lot of people don't understand that, and that's why these discussions go nowhere. You don't get to tell other people how they're allowed to use words, and neither does academia. I see a lot of armchair philosophers trying to pull this too, and it doesn't work for them any better than it's going to work for JCO. But hey, what do I know, right? Let's continue.
However, I do recognize that many people identify as atheists by stating they just lack the belief in a God rather than actively believing there is no God. It's crucial to understand that whether one defines atheism as the belief that there is no God or as a lack of belief in a God, both positions carry a burden of proof.
You notice he got that wrong, right? What he had on screen is on the one side, believe that there is no God, and on the other, lack of belief there is no God, wouldn't the second one make you a theist? Because we've done videos where the theist tried to pull that, and it didn't work out so well for them, did it? If you lack belief that there is no God, then you have no overriding justification for running around trying to convert people, do you? Atheists generally don't bring up their atheism except in a response to the religious forcing the discussion. We have no Great Commission. We have no demand to deconvert the world. The rise of atheism has only come about as a response to the assholeification of religion. You people did it to yourselves, and now we're winning. Good job.
This reason is simple. Both stances make a claim. The belief that there is no God is a direct claim, a claim that one believes there is no God, while the lack of belief in a God is also a claim that one lacks to believe there is a God.
That's stupid, though. I am not making a claim. I am reporting what is going on inside my own head. I don't have to prove that to anyone, and this is just a desperate stretch just so we can keep a series of videos going. If I say that I like chocolate ice cream, I don't have to prove that to anyone. That is what I like. I'm just telling you what I like. So long as I'm only relating my own personal preferences, I have no burden of proof. This is something else that the religious don't understand. So let me explain it in very small words. If you say, well, I believe there is a God, I would just say, cool, whatever. You are just telling me what's going on inside your own head. You are providing to me your own personal preferences and your own personal beliefs. And honestly, I don't care. The same would go if you'd said, I believe in aliens. Okay, so what? Because that's different from saying aliens actually exist. Now you're making a claim about something that's going on in objective reality, and that's where you pick up the burden of proof. I don't care what you believe, but the second it leaves your head and enters the realm of reality, that's a different matter entirely. Now, I'm going to let him keep on going, but I'm sure this is going to come up again. And when it does, I'll explain further then.
To differentiate between these definitions in these videos I create, I might use the terms lack-theist or non-theist. These terms more accurately capture the position of those who define their atheism as merely just lacking the belief in a God, distinguishing it from the philosophical definition.
You're not going to find a lot of atheists who give a damn about the philosophical definition. Most of us think philosophy, at least when it tries to define the world in self-serving ways, we think it can just go take a long walk off a short pier. You actually have to deal with the world in the way that it is, not in the way that you desperately wish it could be. And this is a major problem with the religious, right? We've seen this time and time again. That's why they get criticized as much as they do. Because, as I was saying, when you start making declarative statements about objective reality, that's when you have to start backing those statements up, and the religious never can. You are free to believe whatever cockamamie load of bullshit you want within the confines of your own head, so long as you don't start claiming those things exist out in the real world too. Now, people are probably going to look at you funny. People are probably going to think you're out of your mind, but you don't have to prove anything so long as it stays inside your noggin. Go ahead, knock yourself out. I don't care. At least not until you become a danger to yourself and others, and then maybe we'll have a discussion. If you could keep it at, I believe, I probably wouldn't say. It's when you get to what I believe is actually true that you've got problems. But we'll come back to that, I'm sure.
Making this distinction is important because it helps clarify the different types of claims being made and the corresponding responsibilities for providing justification.
To be really honest, I rarely ever run into people who claim gods absolutely positively do not exist, period. And for anybody who's watched this channel for any length of time, I call those people out, just like I do for the religious. I am very consistent in this, and I think you should be too. Any claim about reality has an inherent burden of proof, no matter what that claim is. What goes on in your head, so long as you don't pretend it exists for anybody else, hey, that's on you. Of course, as I said before, if you try that, and some theists do, that just eliminates any justification you have for trying to convert anybody else to your beliefs. If it's just something in your head, if it's some aberration of your own thoughts, then what is there to convert anybody else to? Whereas I'm not trying to convert anyone, because I don't give a crap what anyone else believes so long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Although I think lying to people does hurt people, pushing irrational and unjustifiable beliefs on others, that hurts people too. Encouraging magical thinking, that hurts people, so there is that. But pretty much whatever's going on in that 3-pound meat sack in your head, so long as you keep it to yourself and it doesn't negatively affect how you treat other people, I don't care, go right ahead. How am I going to know what's going on in there anyhow? So how could I possibly complain?
Whether you're a theist, atheist, lacktheist, non-theist, whoever, engaging in rational discourse requires recognizing and fulfilling your burden of proof.
Only if you're making a positive claim about the real world such that it affects and involves others. If you think there's a little man in your head driving your body around like in Men in Black, and you never tell anybody else about it, and you don't try to get anybody else to hold that belief as true as well, I don't care. I think you should still get professional help, but how would I even know that it's going on if you keep your mouth shut? Because here's something else that the religious can't handle. Most atheists, if the religious would just go the hell away and leave everybody else alone, we'd never talk about atheism again. I am not an atheist evangelist. I don't talk about this shit unless you bring it up first. Whenever it comes up, it is a response to something the religious are doing first. My channel is not evangelical atheism. It is a response to the videos made by the religious. That's why I make response videos the overwhelming majority of the time. I am not making any claims about what is going on in objective reality, and if I do, I back it up. I am demanding proof from the people who are making those claims, and sadly, those people can never meet that burden. If every theist on the planet unilaterally decided to shut the hell up, hey, I'd shut the channel down. I'm sure I could find a lot of other things to do with my time. Why don't the religious try that? Because that would sure be nice, wouldn't it? Because they can't. Because they believe they have to blab on and on and on about their imaginary friends to anyone who will listen, and let's be honest, most people who won't. So I think it's pretty safe that this channel isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and that's not because I have the burden of proof for anything. It's because the religious won't shut their fucking gobs. It's their fault, not mine.
By understanding and acknowledging the nuances of how both definitions evolve a burden of proof, we can ensure more respectful and productive conversations about the belief and disbelief in the existence of a God.
Except you still don't understand what the burden of proof is. You need to provide evidence that the positive claims that you make are actually true in objective reality. And the word positive is important, and it confuses a lot of people too, since a positive claim isn't just, this thing is true, but also, that thing is false. If you claim a thing is false, you gotta back that up too, which is why atheists who claim that there are no gods, they are making a positive claim, and that needs evidentiary support. I have seen no convincing evidence that there are any gods, which most agnostic atheists say, you know, the people who lack belief in gods. That is not a positive claim. It does not require evidence to back it up. Saying, I haven't seen any evidence, is not saying, I know that there are no gods. Those are two entirely different things. You don't have to prove that to anyone, because that's just what's going on in your head. If you're not convinced, then you're not convinced. You're not saying that absolutely positively there are no gods, period, only that you are not convinced that there are. And that's actually a call for the religious to present evidence that what they claim is true, and we all know they're not going to do that. I mean, there could be gods, but that would require that convincing evidence that we haven't seen, and the religious haven't presented any of that yet, have they? That's why he's just making a fool of himself, because he doesn't understand the arena that he's playing in. Just like most theists that I see, he's trying to shift the burden because he can't meet it for his own claims. And that's not something to be proud of, is it?
Again, thank you for watching, and stay tuned next video where I try to delve in deeper into these concepts.
You don't even understand the basics, though. That's kind of the problem, and why he gets positively roasted in the comments of just about all of his videos. He doesn't understand what he's saying. I mean, I guess he understands what he wants to be true, but that's not the actual philosophical burden of proof that he's trying to appeal to, is it? If you say something supposedly true about the real world, you need to be able to back it up. That's all it means. If you don't say anything supposedly true, then you have no burden of proof. Of course, the religious are often convinced that everybody else has to be just like they are, and we're simply not. In other videos, he tries to say, atheists all have faith, and that's absurd. Faith in what? It's just desperately running around with the goalposts to make things easier for his side. They really want to believe the stuff that makes them happy is true, even if they can't back any of it up objectively. They could all just shut their mouths and keep their beliefs to themselves, and thus nobody would ever ask them for their support, because nobody would ever know what they believed. But they can't do that either, can they? It's their own damn fault that they find themselves in the hot seat. But they can't accept that, so they just try to push it off on others. That is patently irrational. But look who we're talking about, right? He even had to make a video quite a while after this whole thing started where he had to admit that theists also had a burden of proof. I don't think he ever met it in that video because I think we all know he can't, but at least he was brave enough to say so, and I will commend him for that. He still has all of his work ahead of him, though, and I don't think we should be holding our breath for him to get anywhere useful. Anyhow, we're going to stop here with only one video done, because I've been realizing that since I've been rewriting these videos after the crash, all of my responses are getting much, much longer. So let me know down in the comments if you like that or not. Not that it's really going to matter, because by the time you see this, by the time you can respond, all of the rewrites will long since have been done, and the videos will be scheduled, and, it'll be too late for that. But hey, the comments are open regardless. Let me see your thoughts. That's kind of what this thing is all about, right? So go ahead and do that. Anyway, I'll see you all next time whenever I get back to this thing. And we'll come back and revisit this series sometime down the road, because doing these things one after the other, that would get kind of boring. But I don't think this is going to get any better, do you? I guess we'll have to see. Do atheists have the burden of proof? Not most of them, although I might argue that some, a very few, do. That's not what many theists say, though, because they're just ignorant of pretty much everything. Today, we get an excellent example of that in action. Won't that be fun? We're back again today with JCO Journey, and he's still rambling on about the burden of proof and completely misunderstanding every single bit of it. This might even be worse because, well, you'll see. Wait until the end, because I ask what I think is a really important question, and I want your input on it. How the religious can be this clueless, and to be fair, it's not just them. I want to say that right up front, because I don't want to generalize where generalization isn't necessary. But how people can be this dumb, that's really kind of a shock. It's like they're looking for problems to apply their made-up solutions to. Maybe you're just doing things wrong. So let's go watch and see.
To understand the burden of proof, it's essential to first define what a claim is. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, a claim can be defined as to assert and demand recognition of an alleged right, title, possession, attribute, acquirement, or the like. To assert as one's own, to affirm one's possession. Wait!
That is not what that word means in this context. Seriously, I shouldn't have to explain this, but if I remember correctly, I had to fix one of his other definitions in a previous video. Come on, this really can't be that hard. So here's the definition that he should have been presenting, also from Oxford. To state or assert that something is the case, typically without providing evidence or proof. That's the verb. The noun is as follows: an assertion of the truth of something, typically one that is disputed or in doubt. That's what we're talking about here. If someone makes a claim, they are saying that that thing that they're making the claim about is true. It's a declarative statement about the state of factual reality. It is a positive claim. That's why they need to back it up. Somehow, having him pull this twice in the same video series, that's not filling me with a whole lot of confidence. But let's continue.
That's not right. It should say...
Claim is simply to contend, maintain, and assert.
And that's still wrong. It's a little less wrong, I guess, but that's not remotely as wrong as the first attempt, so we'll at least give him credit for that. Because I can make all kinds of claims about things that I don't have to back up for anyone. For example, since he's going to give one in a second, if I say that chocolate is my favorite flavor of ice cream, and it isn't, but let's pretend, then I don't have to prove that to anyone because that isn't a claim about the state of factual reality. It's just reporting on my own personal preference. There is no evidence required. How much do you want to bet that he's going to try to take an end run with the goalpost strapped to his back so that he can maintain his laughably wrong assertion about atheists? I don't know. Let's see.
For example, there is X, I believe there is X, and I lack the belief in X are all claims.
Nope. The first one is a claim. The second one is arguably a claim, as you are presumably also asserting this with your belief. X is still a thing. I lack belief in X is not a claim. It's not making a positive statement about the state of objective reality. It's just saying, I don't believe you. This guy really is an idiot, isn't he? Saying, I don't accept your claim is not in and of itself a new claim. It's simply saying that you have not been convinced that the other person's claim is factually correct. It's not even saying that I'm convinced that you're wrong. You might be able to parlay that into a claim that has to be defended, but saying, I don't buy it, that's not a claim. Not remotely. This guy's a real moron, isn't he?
All are assertions. One is a claim about the nature of reality, another is a claim on the belief states, while the other is still a claim on the belief state, but more specifically the lack of belief. They all state a position regarding a particular subject.
Then, by that definition, anything that anyone ever says, that all has to be a claim. And that's kind of what he's getting at, I think. He's just made the burden of proof so absurdly wide that it applies to every single word that comes out of anyone's mouth. How ridiculous is that? Now, according to him, I'm hungry, that's got a burden of proof that you have to present to other people. And that's just bullshit. That's why, way back when this nonsense started, I also included the caveat that you have to care about the subject enough to demand that it be backed up by the other person. If you say that you have a dog, I generally don't care. In theory, I guess you have a burden of proof for that, but only if the other person in the conversation bothers to ask you to back it up. Anyone with as big a stick up his ass as this guy obviously has, nobody is ever going to talk to him again because he'll just be making a complete pest of himself every time he talks to you. Granted, he's only doing it selectively. If a Christian said, I believe in God, he's not going to demand that they back it up, is he? because this entire video series is just a gigantic defense mechanism. It's a way for him to shift the burden of proof away from himself, since he's the one making the actionable claims, and onto other people who just aren't. This is really getting ridiculous, and I trust no one is surprised.
In debates about the existence of a God, the statement, God exists, is a direct claim. More specifically, individuals may assert it is true that God exists, or it is false that God exists.
And in that specific circumstance, I would agree. Both sides have a burden of proof because both sides have made a positive claim. Both sides are stating positively that some fact about the real world is true. I'm with you there, which is why I challenge people who say that gods absolutely positively do not exist. Those people need to be able to back it up in some demonstrable way with objective evidence. One standard here, remember? I don't do double standards. I suspect this is about as far as this agreement is going to go, though, before it starts to devolve into desperation. So, let's see.
Both of these are direct claims about the nature of reality. On the other hand, if someone states, I lack the belief that God exists, or I'm unconvinced that God exists, this is not a negation of the original claim, but rather a rejection.
But it isn't. Saying, you have not convinced me that your proposition is true, that is not the same thing as saying your proposition is false. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying that you have failed to present sufficient convincing evidence for me to conclude that you're right. And that's why I don't believe you. You have not convinced me. Now, as I've said before, you may not care if you convince me, and that's fine. That's entirely up to you. However, I am free to go out and tell other people that you have not convinced me, to point out where your arguments and your evidence is not convincing and why, at least in my own personal opinion. I can suggest that I don't think they should be convinced by it either. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that you've got bad arguments that are not convincing. Because I think he's entirely misunderstanding what most atheists are doing. It's another case of, you need to be just like I am. Look, I'm not trying to deconvert you, because I really don't give a damn. I'm just listening to your argument and seeing if they stand up to any kind of critical scrutiny. If they do, I will change my mind to align with what you've now demonstrably said about the real world, the thing that you have proven is actually true. If not, then I won't. So far, at least, no theist has ever presented a convincing argument to me that their gods are real. Now, I'm not saying their gods aren't real, only that I am not convinced that they are. So all of this is just bullshit, based on his own fundamental misunderstanding of the actual situation at play. And really, what the hell else is new, right?
It's crucial to understand that the rejection of the claim God exists, or it is true that God exists, it is a claim itself.
But we haven't done that. That's where he's going entirely wrong. It's really sort of the difference between saying, my favorite flavor of ice cream is vanilla, and the best flavor of ice cream in the world is vanilla. One is a statement about reality, one is not. I am not convinced that your argument is true is not a statement about reality. It's a position that I hold in my head based on your complete failure to convince me of the veracity of any of your claims. This is something else that I see a lot, and not just from the religious. People get so emotionally attached to their positions that they can't see anything else. Well, of course it's true. And then they spin it so that anyone who doesn't agree, not disagrees, mind you, but simply doesn't share their views, well, those people have to be diametrically opposed to everything that they say, everything that they believe. But that's not what's going on. Not that you can ever get that through their heads, can ya?
It implies the absence of belief in the existence of a God, which requires justification to hold that position rationally.
It requires nothing remotely of the sort. This guy is a loon, but he's absolutely not alone. I see this a lot from the religious and the non-religious alike. They are fanatically invested in a position, and they can't understand that they are fundamentally out of line. Now, it's fine if he wants to believe in a God, because what the hell am I going to say to that? No skin off my nose at all. That doesn't make it factually true, though. I mean, it does that he believes, but not that the God is actually real. And if he wants me to believe that a God is real as well, specifically his God, I suppose, then he needs to convince me that his God actually exists in the common reality that we share. If he can't do that, or if he chooses not to do that, then I am welcome to go on not believing in his God because I have not been convinced that his God is real. Where he's wrong here is the assumption that there are only two possible positions. I believe X is true, or I believe X isn't true. But that's not the case. There are other alternatives out there that he doesn't want to admit to or that he's not aware of. I can say I am not convinced, which I'm not. I am taking no position either way. I can also say I don't care. That's the agnostic position. That's I don't even give a damn about the question. He's really trying to turn this into a false dichotomy, which is in and of itself fallacious. And again, I doubt anybody's really surprised by that, are they?
It's even in the words. If you state something, you have effectively made a claim.
If you state something supposedly true about the world, you have made a claim. If you don't, you haven't. And that's why you need to specify positive claims. I always do that. He doesn't. That's why he goes on and on and on and on about all of this crap, entirely misunderstanding the subject matter because he's got a particular conclusion that he really likes, whereas I don't. That's something the religious have a problem with. Not just them, of course, but I'm just trying to be honest here. They assume that everyone is just like they are, and we're not. They want everyone to be just like they are, and we're not. They are fundamentally mistaken about their views on reality in this regard. I am only after the best supported view of reality that I can get to. If they cannot convince me that their view is factually correct, then I am not going to believe it. That doesn't mean I automatically embrace the opposite, that I believe they're wrong. That's the fallacious bit that they're engaged in. I am leaving the question up for grabs until someone else can take a more successful swing at it. It's why the lack of belief is not the same thing as the belief in the lack of existence. The religious have a serious problem with that. That's a them problem, not an us problem.
The importance of defining claims lies in understanding that even stating the absence of belief can be seen as a claim.
Seen as is not is. Just because you are desperate to push the burden of proof onto atheists, that doesn't mean that we have it. This is a problem of interpretation, not existence. It's the desperation for somebody else to be in the hot seat because the religious are tired of boiling in the pot. But that's their problem, not mine. They put themselves there voluntarily. If you don't want to be in the hot seat, shut up. It's that simple. If you don't open your mouth and make claims that can be challenged or doubted, then you won't have any problems, will you? Of course, their theology makes that impossible, at least for some of them, which is why they climbed up on the stove of their own free will in the first place and put their butt in the pan. Don't be a dumbass. Stop being your own worst enemy, because that's effectively what's going on here.
For instance, an atheist statement of lacking the belief in God is not a neutral position. It implies a stance that also demands justification.
But it is a neutral position. You continually saying it isn't, that doesn't change reality. We are not saying that gods aren't real. We are saying we aren't convinced that they are. That's like me saying I'm not convinced that Bigfoot exists, but that's not saying I'm convinced that Bigfoot doesn't. I haven't been convinced either way. Granted, the default position in all of these arguments is one of skepticism. This is also something that tends to confuse the religious. I don't believe in any gods, which means that I live as if no gods exist, because that is the most tenable position that I've seen. I'm not saying for sure that no gods are real, just that I see no reason whatsoever to even pretend that they do. And the same goes for Bigfoot. I am not convinced that a real existing Bigfoot is out there somewhere, and therefore I live as though Bigfoot doesn't exist. That's the default position after all. It's no different than if I had never even heard of the concept of Bigfoot. I'm living no differently today than I would if I had never been introduced to the possibility of any gods, just as you are living as if you had never heard of the possibility of the Garuda, which is a bird creature from Hindu mythology. Once you've heard of it, then you have to decide if you're going to adopt that piece of information into your mind and change how you live and change how you consider things, or continue as you always have, being unconvinced of the importance or validity of the Garuda. I'm doing the exact same thing with any gods, being completely unconvinced that they're worthwhile or real. Therefore, I'm just living as though they're not there.
By recognizing that both direct assertions and rejections are claims, we can better understand the burden of proof that both parties have in these discussions.
You're the only one that's misunderstanding stuff, not me. Why? Because he's got a vested interest in shifting the burden of proof. This isn't done because he really doesn't understand. I'm sure he gets it on some level. He's doing it because he's desperate to get off the hot seat that he's put himself in voluntarily. He wants somebody else to be sitting in the fire for a while, but he has no rational justification for what he's doing. He just really likes the idea. Now, granted, I've got no idea what's going on in his head. He could really believe this crap, which is sad if it's true, but I can't say that it's not. That's a matter of ignorance, not dishonesty. It's why I say that the religious are either dumb or dishonest or both. That's not an insult, that's just an observation. They are either dumb, not understanding the state of the world around them and not having a rational epistemic standard for determining objective truth, or they're dishonest, having such a strong emotional stake in believing this stuff that they're willing to go to any lengths whatsoever to make it seem at least plausible, even if they can't show that any of it is true, or both. And a lot are both in my experience and in my opinion. That doesn't really mean much, but these people have a lot of problems upstairs. They are desperate not to live in the real world that they actually live in. They don't care if the stuff in their head actually maps coherently onto objective reality. And that's kind of sad, isn't it?
This understanding is crucial for maintaining fair and rational discourse.
And there's that word again. Nobody said that the world was going to be fair. It's not. Stop pretending otherwise. You put yourself into this position. You can get yourself out of it, as I've already explained, but you simply refuse. That doesn't mean you get to drag other people down to your level. Calls for fairness are often just a dodge. You have your responsibilities that you simply cannot discharge. It doesn't matter what anybody else's responsibilities might be. You have failed utterly to discharge your own. Maybe you should do something about that. But no, the religious spend a lot of time, by and large, complaining about everybody else, pointing fingers outward, when they really need to focus on their own pathetic failures. That's why we see so many excuses surrounding 1 Peter 3:15. You are supposed to be able to provide a reason, hopefully a good reason, for why you believe this unsupported nonsense. Get to it. But they know that they have no good reasons, so they just make excuses for why they don't even have to try. We saw Mike Winger's video on that a long time ago, right? If you recognize that your reasons are unconvincing to others, then maybe you shouldn't believe it yourself. Go think about that for a while, because it might help.
Whether you are affirming a belief or rejecting it, you are making a statement about reality.
Still not doing either. Try to keep up. Because we're back to that false dichotomy again. He can't see that there are other options because he doesn't want it to be true. What you want doesn't matter, though, and that's something else that the religious have a hard time getting through their heads. To be honest, lots of other people do the same thing. They are so convinced that they are right that they automatically reject anyone who disagrees without considering their arguments or the things that other people have pointed out about the failures of their own. Because they just don't care, do they? That's a human problem, but it is an irrational problem nonetheless.
Or at the very least, your reality, that requires evidence or reasoning.
My reality is the one that has all the evidence for it. That's because I only care about the truth. That's why I am not impressed with your claims, but that's something else entirely, isn't it? I go where the evidence leads. You are making claims without sufficient evidence to back any of them up. That's why I'm not convinced by your claims. When you come up with evidence, come on back and we can talk, because until you can do that, I am going to continue to be unconvinced by your unsupported claims. That's how this works. It's kind of sad that you can't figure that out, but there you go.
This understanding of defining a claim and how both direct and indirect assertions require justifications are foundational for any rational discourse, especially those about the existence of a God.
Sorry, but gods aren't special. Gods don't get special dispensation because you really, really like them. I think that's another problem with the religious, because they have an all-consuming passion for their imaginary friends that I don't think are remotely justified in the real world. Because here's something else that they just don't like. If they could prove that a god was real, any god, take your pick, I'd just adjust my view of reality to include that god and move on with my life. I wouldn't be bowing down to said gods unless I thought that I had good justification. And I'm sorry, fear that I'll get smited or sent to some kind of eternal torment, that's not a good reason to worship a god. That's actually a good reason to hate one, but not to follow one. Because I don't live my life in fear like the religious tend to do. So that's another preconception that they need to be disabused of. I find their entire outlook to be childish and pathetic. How about you?
Stay tuned as I try to delve deeper into the burden of proof and how it applies to both theists and atheists. But again, thanks for watching a lot.
He's just going to make more empty claims, entirely misunderstand the conversation, and run around with the goalposts while he desperately tries to get off the hot seat and push other people on. I'm not really impressed with this, are you? Now, I don't have any idea what he's going to do in the next 6 or so videos, something like that. Although he could have done more since the last time I looked, but this is all starting to feel very samey, isn't it? Maybe you're getting something else out of it. Let me know down in the comments if you are. But for me, this is just the same thing over and over and over again. Him misrepresenting the burden of proof, misrepresenting atheism, not understanding the fundamental disconnect that he has with reality, and pretending that he gets to tell others what they believe, when in fact he doesn't. We don't believe that. That's not how this works. We are not doing what he's claiming that we're doing. In fact, often we're doing the polar opposite. This is really common among the religious. At least I find that it is, mostly because of this silly, "you're really just like I am" crap, when we are anything but. Get out of your own echo chamber and learn to deal with the real world. It's nice out here, I promise. We got cookies and everything. So let me know what you think below, and if you think it's really worthwhile continuing. I'll do at least 1 or 2 more because it'll take me that long to get your feedback. But if people vote to give up, and I'm kind of leaning it that way myself, then maybe that's what we'll do. There's only so many times you can spout the same misconception over and over and over again before people in the audience get bored. So let me know what you think, because seriously, I am not at all impressed. The burden of proof is a complete waste of time when it comes to the religious, because they have it, they just have no rational response to it. So what do? They lie, of course, but that's not really impressive either. That's when they get desperate, and I think that's what we're going to see today. Get ready for it, and let's begin. I had somebody ask on one of these videos that I continue, or at the very least that I hit 3 very specific ones. That being number 4, which we've already done, number 8, and number 11. Now, sure, I could just jump to number 8 and then do number 11 and be done with it, but since I haven't really gotten any feedback yet, I'm just going to keep going and cover all of these, at least until they get boring, after which, if I haven't done them already, number 8 and number 11 it is. So let's try number 5 of JCO Journey's really silly videos on the burden of proof, shall we? Won't that be fun?
So in discussions about the belief in a God, a critical concept often overlooked is epistemic justification.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And here we go again. So before he gets there, let's just quickly define what that is. Epistemic justification is the degree to which a belief is justified or reasonable. Basically, it's how much evidence you have to back up any given claim. The problem here, and this is nothing new, is that atheists aren't making any claims. Thus, we don't need epistemic justification because we have nothing to support. This is the problem, and it goes all the way back to the first video where he doesn't know what atheism is. So I figure that's where he's going to go wrong right out of the gate, but let's continue and see.
Now this refers to the reasoning or evidence that makes a belief not just rational, but also justifiable within a framework of knowledge.
Which is exactly what I said. The problem is we don't have a belief. If there is no belief, if there are no claims being made, then there doesn't need to be any kind of reasoning or evidence, because what the hell are you trying to support? This is exactly why this video series is such a mess, because he has no clue what the hell he's talking about. Granted, we can say that about pretty much every theist, can't we? William Lane Craig, he doesn't know what he's doing either. Neither does Frank Turek, neither did Daniel King. And I think that's perhaps one of the most apt analogies that we can bring up. They both spend so much time talking out of their asses without coming anywhere remotely close to reality, and it doesn't seem to matter just how much people correct them, they still insist on being wrong. Granted, I have no reason to think that either King or JCO here have ever seen any of my videos, or anyone else's that's been critical of them, because they just don't care. These videos were all made before I did a single response, so I guess it wouldn't matter regardless, but still, both get roasted in the comments on their own videos, and still they persist. I have had numerous people come up to me and say, yep, JCO's been corrected, and he's still doing it anyhow. What the hell is wrong with these idiots?
For those who claim to lack the belief that there is a God, understanding epistemic justification is crucial because it underscores the burden of proof that still applies.
There is no burden of proof for atheists. And I love how he says, claims to lack belief in God, like we're just lying. I wouldn't be surprised if he was one of those crazy Christians who says, well, the Bible says everybody knows God is real, so you all do too. Yeah, fuck you and your stupid Bible. I do not believe. Granted, they don't care about the reality. This is all about preaching to other Christians, but it really makes you look dumb when you do it. And I just noticed something else. He apparently renamed his channel since the last time we looked. Now it's Jonathan Owens, not JCO Journey. Okay, I don't really care. I'm still going to call him JCO, which is just as accurate and shorter to say. So none of this is going to impress anyone with a clue. What else is new?
Even when one doesn't assert the non-existence of a God, epistemic justification is the reasoning or evidence that makes a belief rationally acceptable and knowledge conductive.
So, wait a minute. He even acknowledges people who don't say that no gods exist, but he still claims that they do in some way. Dude, you've got problems. We are not saying there are no gods. We are saying that we are not convinced that there are. We have not seen the evidence that would lead us to conclude that any gods are real. We're not saying that they're not real. We're saying we have not been convinced. Those are two entirely different things. This is where you see a lot of theists saying, well, then you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic. Well, what difference does that make? The label that gets slapped on us doesn't change our actual position. We still don't believe you. We still don't believe in your gods. This kind of argument makes no sense at all. Who cares about the words? It's the position that matters, and we are still not convinced that your imaginary friends are real. Rent a clue.
It's not just about holding a belief, or lack thereof, but about having sound reasons that justify that position in a way that contributes to the pursuit of truth.
That's what we're doing. You have not presented any convincing evidence to us that shows that your claims are true. Therefore, we are withholding assent until you do a better job. Are you really that dumb? Please tell me you're not that dumb. It's like not accepting the existence of Bigfoot until sufficient convincing evidence has been presented. I don't have to prove that Bigfoot isn't real. I just haven't been convinced that it is. This is where you know that the religious are running on emotions, not intellect. They really want everyone to kiss their God's ass, but when we don't, they desperately need a way to explain it to each other so they don't feel bad that we're pointing and laughing. Your arguments are crap. Your evidence is non-existent, and you're the ones that have no epistemic justification for your own beliefs. Stop projecting, because it's not doing you any good.
In other words, epistemic justification ensures that a belief, or the lack of one, is not arbitrary but grounded in rational consideration and is aligned with what is known and can be known.
He doesn't know what words mean, does he? I see this all the time, not just from the religious, but from philosophy fanboys as well. This is pretty much, I read it in a book somewhere, or my introduction to philosophy course said this. And because they're not well versed in the actual facts and don't really care, and have no demonstrable grasp on reality, they think that they get to grandstand in front of others who know a hell of a lot more about it than they do. This is bald rationalization because he desperately wants to get to his preconceived God, no matter how absurdly stupid it all is.
When someone says they lack the belief that there is a God, they're not necessarily making a direct claim about the non-existence of a God, but are instead rejecting theistic claims.
Exactly. Of course, he'll take a quick hard left at Albuquerque in a second, but that is exactly what we're saying. What you have presented is not good enough to convince us that you have the slightest clue what the hell you're talking about. Granted, they can't admit it because that would make them feel bad, but that is the case. Your evidence, your claimed evidence, is just shit. Do better. Not that they were ever convinced by the evidence that they claimed to have to begin with. Their faith came from childhood indoctrination and wishes and dreams and, gee, it really sounds nice to me, doesn't it? That shouldn't convince anyone, but sadly it does. And when you've been brainwashed from a young age, you can't understand that everyone else isn't the same way. Everybody out there isn't just like you. Therefore, you have to make excuses for why everybody isn't thinking the same things that you are. And that's all he's doing here. And that really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone.
However, this position still requires epistemic justification.
No, it doesn't, because it isn't a position. This is always going to be his problem. He can't see beyond the black and white that he's got in his head. If they're not for us, they have to be against us. Don't be a moron. You're just making yourself look bad. I am not making any positive claims about reality. That's where you have the burden of proof and you need an epistemic justification. And I am not doing that. You are. Stop trying to shift the burden of proof to me and just meet your own burden. And they can't do it. But that's really what they need to do. Stop with the excuses already and get to work, because you're the one looking bad with your failures.
To hold this lack of belief rationally, one must be able to justify why they find theistic claims unconvincing or why the evidence presented by theists does not meet their standards for belief.
Because you have no evidence. All you have are claims. The Bible is a claim. It is not evidence. Your faith is a claim. It is not evidence. Your arguments are all just claims. They are not evidence. That's why we keep pointing out what evidence is. Evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. And they don't have any of that. That's the problem. I really like the idea is not evidence. I had an experience that I interpreted as a God is not evidence. Evidence is that which you can use to justify your beliefs beyond the beliefs themselves. Seriously, look it up. You people are nowhere remotely close.
Let's try this example. Person A may state, I lack the belief that there is a God. Person B may ask, why do you lack that belief? Person A's response could be, because I haven't seen evidence for a God. Now in this exchange, person A not only states their lack of belief, but also provides a reason for it. This reason, stating that they haven't seen evidence, serves as person A's epistemic justification.
And we all say that. If you want to ask why what you claim isn't convincing evidence, just say so. I've got no problem explaining. I've been doing it this entire video. I do it in virtually every video. You cannot possibly watch my channel and not know why I am not convinced by this stuff. Not unless you're deluded or dishonest. So which is it? Let me know down in the comments which one you think applies to JCO here, because this guy is just a broken record without a clue.
It's this justification that satisfies the burden of proof for their stance. Without offering this reasoning, person A's position might be seen as arbitrary or unjust.
And that tells you right there that he's never talked to an actual atheist in his entire life, because we all say that. This is why pandering to the already faithful doesn't help your credibility. You don't know anything about atheists or atheism. You have not interacted with atheists, and you don't know that everything that you're whining about, we already do. That's why, for the religious, their view of atheists is just the imaginary boogeymen that they make up in their heads because they're too scared to leave their echo chambers and deal with actual reality honestly. This is not a good thing. It's no wonder they look so dumb, because they are.
Now, one could argue that the reason they gave was weak or just a given. It would be like someone stating, I've seen evidence for a God, as reasoning for why they claim God exists.
You mean like theists do all the time. But then we can examine their claims to see if they hold water, and they never ever do. The standard Christian claim that I've had an experience with God falls apart because you can't justify how you actually know it was God. Or anything, really. It all comes down to, I had an experience and God done it. How do you know that? I just do. No, you look like an idiot. This is why religion is so unconvincing, because they have nothing objective to back up their claims. They don't understand that the things that they believe on faith are not factually demonstrably true. They just really like the idea. We see where you're going wrong. Why can't you?
But in simplest terms, we can keep it for now. However, it's important to realize that person A has introduced a new claim. I haven't seen evidence for a God.
That's not a claim. That's a statement of fact. You might not like it, but it is, in fact, demonstrably true. This is pure desperation, designed to get him back to where he really wants to be, but it just doesn't work. You'll get theists arguing with you. Yes, we have. Look at the trees. No, you're an idiot. The trees don't prove that your imaginary friend exists. This is a completely unjustified assertion that you're just stapling onto it because you really like the idea. It isn't going to convince us, and it shouldn't convince you. The fact that it does, that just makes you look like a moron. Because you are. But let's get back to his bald rationalizations, because this is where he's going to fall apart. He doesn't know what any of this means at all.
Now this claim itself carries a burden of proof. Person A now bears responsibility to what they consider to be adequate evidence and why there is no evidence they encounter for a God.
The first part might be valid, and we do explain why what the religious say is not convincing, because a lot of us have already been there. However, I no more have to prove to you that I am not convinced than I have to prove to you what my favorite flavor of ice cream is. This is a desperation move, and it all falls apart the second that you examine any of it critically. Granted, we could turn that around and demand that he justify why he's convinced that a God exists. I could say, well, I don't believe that you're actually convinced. You have to prove it to me. And I wish that would shut them up, but it doesn't, and we know it. You can't show someone else what is going on in your own head, at least not by simply talking about it. Maybe someday there will be technology that will allow that, but this is not that day. So this is just dumb.
If they don't provide further reasoning, their position might still be questioned for a lack of justification.
But we do. You're just not listening. You're just hiding in your echo chambers, trying to boldly rationalize this to other believers. We are very transparent, or at least I am, since I don't get to speak for anyone else. You can let me know down in the comments how you handle this, because most of the time I see atheists being very clear about why they are not convinced. So this is just a theist living in a fantasy land in his own head. What the hell else is new?
One must understand burden of proof bounces back and forth often in a discussion. Now, understanding epistemic justification is crucial for maintaining intellectually honest and rigor in discussions about the belief and disbelief in the existence of a God.
Notice he's right back to, you actively disbelieve a God thing again, right? His argument has entirely fallen apart already, but he's got to keep trying to reinforce the point, no matter how badly it's failed. Intellectually honest, huh? Yeah, I don't buy it. He wouldn't know what that was if it bit him in the ass. Because here's the reality. You make claims about a God. Any God, because it applies to all religions. I don't really care. And this also applies to any irrational belief. I will listen to your claims. I am not convinced that your claims are valid based on the corroboratory evidence that you have provided, if you have provided any at all, which most of the time we know they don't. I will leave the conversation not having changed my mind. You get mad that I haven't changed my mind, and you try to shift the burden of proof onto me. I tell you that you're full of shit, and I remain unconvinced, because the only thing that's going to convince me is the corroboratory evidence that you have not provided, or have not provided anything worthwhile. The only one who has been intellectually honest this entire time is me. Now, I'm not telling you that you can't believe. You can do whatever the hell you want. I'm not even telling you that you're wrong necessarily, although if I do, I will have the evidence that backs me up. You desperately want me to believe, and because I don't, because of the complete and utter failure on your part to justify your own position, instead, you just lie about it and strap the goalpost to your back and run downfield. This is a you problem. It always has been. If you were honest and you're not, you just shrug and move on, because my believing you is entirely irrelevant to anything. You failed to convince me. Fuck off. Yet they can't do that, can they? This isn't getting any better.
It's the why behind the belief or lack thereof.
And we've given you that why. You just don't like it. Well, too bad for you. You can't deal with your own failures. You desperately want us to believe too, and we don't. And the reason that we don't is because you have failed. Not specifically you necessarily, but your side has failed. You try to recast it as an us problem, and it isn't. You try to shift the burden of proof to us, and it isn't on us. It's on you. Nothing has changed here. You're just butthurt that we don't believe the unsupported garbage that you believe, because you shouldn't believe it either. That's your fault, not ours.
Now, without this justification, the stance lacking belief could be seen as arbitrary. Providing epistemic reasons, individuals can demonstrate that their position is rational and grounded in evidence or reasoning of some sort.
See, here's another problem. There's lots of problems, aren't there? But here's another one. He thinks that we owe him something. We don't. That's why I've made the case that the burden of proof isn't mandatory. If someone doesn't ask you to justify your own stance, then you don't have to. It's not inherent. It's case dependent. If I say I've got a dog, and I do, 3 of them, and you don't ask me to back it up, I don't have to back it up. If you say that you've got a God, and I don't ask you to support your claim, you don't have to support your claim. If I do ask, you still don't necessarily have to. Nobody's holding a gun to your head and forcing you to comply. You can just say no and leave. What am I going to do? Well, I can tell others that you don't support your claims, and that might cost you some credibility, but if you don't care about that, so what? So this whole thing is really just a waste of time. He's failed to support his own claims, and now he's mad at the people who didn't buy into it uncritically. This is just childish. It really is. But really, what do we expect?
In summary, when someone states they lack belief that there is a God, they still carry a burden of proof in the form of epistemic justification to explain why they do not accept theistic claims.
And we've done so. You're just not listening. Why? Because in virtually all situations, you are not even part of the conversation. If you look at interactions with the religious, they are almost always the same. They make a bunch of unsupported claims, and then they just run away without waiting for anyone to respond. The religious love to do this hit-and-run apologetics thing all the time. There is no back-and-forth conversation going on. It's claims, then a cloud of smoke before the responses come in. They're not really interested in what we have to say because, as I've already pointed out, we've already answered those questions. They just don't care. And that's their problem, not ours.
This ensures that their position is rational and contributes to fair and meaningful discussions about the existence of a God.
And when do you think you're actually going to have a rational claim? Because we call for it all the time, and the religious never comply. Why? Because they don't care. This isn't about fair and rational, it's about faith and fee-fees. That is, by definition, not rational. Rational is based on or in accordance with reason and logic. And the religious have nothing remotely resembling that, do they? Faith can't be rational. If you're rational, you don't need faith. That's why you need evidence, and the religious have absolutely nothing that's even in the same zip code as rational evidence. That's the problem. It's why we're not convinced, because they have nothing that could possibly convince us. Because they're not interested in having their beliefs be in accordance with reality. They're not interested in having their beliefs examined critically. They just can't admit it, and because they have a vested interest in trying to convert the world, trying and failing miserably, they just have to make stuff up. That's all that's ever going on. That's not something that anyone should be proud of, and I really don't get why they are. Anyway, that's it for this one. What do you think? The comments are open for you to use. If there is an overwhelming consensus to give up, I'm just going to jump to number 8 and number 11, but by the time anyone sees this, I'll already have number 6 in the pipeline, so be ready for that. This is just not impressive. If there was good evidence for any God, the religious would be able to present it instead of just playing all these ridiculous games. They'd have a Nobel Prize, probably several, but that hasn't happened, right? Why? Because they've got nothing, no matter how desperately they wish that they did. And that just makes them dumb. Whining isn't going to convince anyone. Try evidence, because that's your only hope, and I don't think you can do it. Prove me wrong by all means. Go ahead. Do atheists have the burden of proof? Yep, here we go again. It never gets any better because the religious just don't care. This is just a desperate attempt to avoiding having to back up their own claims, because we all know they can't. So this is going to sound really, really familiar, because religious bullshit, it never changes, does it? It's been a little bit since we've done a JCO journey video, and things have once again changed. He had changed the name of his channel to his name, and now, at least for the moment, it's Challenge to Change. But I'm just going to keep calling it JCO because it's a lot easier that way. Not an insult or anything, but I'm just doing it for continuity. So it looks like he's going to continue the same old broken record shtick, claiming that atheists have the burden of proof when we clearly don't, and not even understanding what atheism is. But hey, I've had requests that I continue. Well, one request, but I'm willing. So here we go again.
What is the burden of proof?
What?
Understanding this principle is essential for anyone trying to engage in rational discourse, especially when debating about the existence of a God.
It has nothing at all to do with the existence of a God. That's just his particular bugaboo, so he keeps bringing it up. Now, honestly, all of these videos are exactly the same thing. Every single one has said the same thing verbatim, and I don't know how long I can keep giving the same responses. I think I have to do episodes 8 and 11, if I remember right. And if not, somebody tell me down in the comments because I'm not exactly positive. But all of his videos are essentially doing the same thing over and 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 over again. That's got to be boring to just keep repeating yourself. But, yeah, I guess I would know that, wouldn't I? Because every single one of these fucking videos I have to keep repeating myself because he never learns.
In philosophy, the burden of proof, or the Latin phrase onus probandi, which I probably got this wrong horribly, refers to the duty of a person making a claim to provide evidence or reasoning supporting their assertion.
Yes, we know what that is. You have made it very clear over and 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 over again. 6 times now, in fact. Granted, he's gotten it wrong a lot too, and I've had to correct him. Not that he cares, because that's not how this format works, and I've heard from people who've talked to him that he just doesn't give a shit at all. But he doesn't seem to be taking any of the comments in his own videos, correcting his misconceptions seriously at all, because he doesn't care. And just for the record, his upvote to downvote ratio on this video, at least at the time that I'm writing it, is 14 up and 45 down. So it's not like he doesn't know that most people disagree with him. He just doesn't care. And that's kind of a problem, isn't it?
Simply put, the burden of proof is the responsibility to prove one's claim.
I agree. Funny how the religious can never manage it, can they? Because this is really just a response to the failure of their own side. We can't prove that what we're saying is true, but that's okay because I'm going to project that failure onto others and pretend that they're making claims that they can't support too. Except we're not, and even if we were, that doesn't change your burden of proof. What we do is entirely irrelevant to what you need to do. So he has to go to extreme lengths to make believe otherwise because he desperately wants to believe, even though he has no good reason to do so. It's like this guy took an intro to philosophy class and he never got over it. There's a lot of those people out there, sadly. So let's just move on.
This is crucial for maintaining rational discourse and preventing the acceptance of unfounded beliefs.
Yet, you can't look in the mirror, can you? Because the burden of proof doesn't only apply when dealing with other people. You have an implied burden of proof to be able to justify your own beliefs to yourself. Yet the religious, they don't care about that at all, do they? It sounds good to me is about as far as they go. But it doesn't matter what sounds good to you. It matters what you can rationally justify with evidence and logic, and they're not remotely interested in any of that, are they? I don't know if he's ever done a video on why he believes, and if he has, somebody can post a link to that in the comments, and maybe I'll take a look at it. I don't know. I don't know that I'd ever do a response because yeah, his videos are just boring, at least the ones that we're going over. But hey, I'd still be curious to see how he justifies this to anybody without fifis and faith. How about you?
Everybody knows the moon's made of cheese.
Without this requirement, discussions could easily devolve into baseless assertions and unsubstantiated claims.
Oh, so he does know what it's like talking to the religious, because that's all they've got. My book says a thing and I have faith are about as far as most theists are capable of going, and that is not remotely impressive. The second that you turn to faith, you've lost the fight, and I get the feeling that Jonathan here doesn't like that very much, does he? So he's just desperately trying to project his failures onto others, because that's what the religious tend to do. How do I know that he'd fail if I haven't seen the hypothetical "here's why I believe" video? Because all theists fail. I have never seen one in more than 50 years that didn't, because this isn't remotely about the truth. It's about comfort, and that's idiotic. All he's doing here is screaming, "You're doing it too," like a child, except we're not. And even if we were, that doesn't make it acceptable for his side or any side to do the same thing. So this whole thing is really silly, isn't it?
But it's important to note that while the concept of burden of proof is also foundational in law, there are also significant differences between its application in legal context and in philosophy.
Who cares about the law? It really looks like he's desperately searching for anything that he can throw in his next video because he just can't stop talking about this. It's like he's a fanatic or something. Make your point and move on. He can't because this is a pretty large part of his channel. He's still doing it right now. The video that we're responding to at the moment is 7 months old, at least at the time that I'm writing this, because that's really the only time I'm writing this. And he's got another video on the burden of proof that he just released 3 weeks ago, popping up in the sidebar. I mean, seriously, do you not have anything better to do with your life?
In law, the burden of proof is a formal obligation with standards such as beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal cases and the preponderance of the evidence in civil cases. These standards ensure that claims are substantiated before being accepted as true, protecting individuals from wrongful convictions and unfair judgment.
So what? Because I think we recognize by now that in every single video he does, he's just saying the same thing with minor variations because he keeps wanting to repeat his message, no matter how fatally flawed that message actually is. Now, Jonathan showed up here in the comments once and wanted me to go over to his channel to debate, and no, sorry. Not only have I heard from multiple people that Jonathan is, shall we say, a dishonest interlocutor, I've already said what I need to say in all of my response videos. I can't imagine what more there is to add, although I just keep adding more of the same thing over and over, don't I? Now, he said that he was going to go off and do a response to me, which who knows if he ever did, because I don't pay attention to this kind of stuff. I generally ignore stuff like that because it doesn't get you anywhere. But if somebody would like me to respond and has gone and looked at his response video, assuming he actually did one, hey, I would take that under advisement. I mean, I haven't been to his channel since I added the first 9 of his burden of proof videos, and I've been doing these things since last October. And it's not just him. I'm like this with pretty much every theist. I am not subscribed to a single religious channel at all. I don't spend my time stalking these morons. They're just not important. If I see a video go by that I think I want to do, I stick it on the list. Otherwise, no thanks. These things go by the thousands, and I don't think I've seen a single worthwhile one yet.
However, while in philosophical discussions, there usually isn't a third party like a judge or jury to determine if the burden of proof has been met.
Indeed it is. And where one or both parties are unrealistic in their determinations, Mostly, we just stop talking to those people, don't we? It's a complete waste of time, and I'm sorry, but Jonathan here is a complete waste of time. Why? Because he has no evidence to support his own burden of proof, and he's just trying to project his failures onto others. He doesn't understand the conversation going on because he just assumes that everyone is just like he is. All positions are synonymous to his position just because he says so. We're all the same, and that's his problem, not ours, because we're not. So while trying desperately to wiggle out of his own burden of proof, after all, he is inherently making a positive claim about reality that some God is real, he knows that he cannot discharge his requirements, so he just points his fingers outwards and screams, "You're doing it too," as if that actually means anything. Because even if he was right and atheists were doing what he claims, which we're not, or at least I'm not since I don't get to speak for anybody but myself, that changes absolutely nothing because he still needs to back up his own claims. And he can't. Big surprise there.
It is subjective and based on the perspective of the parties involved to adequately determine if the burden of proof is met. For example, a person may state God is real because the Bible says so.
Which doesn't mean a damn thing because you're just moving the goalposts. Now, you have to prove that the Bible is reliable, defensible, evidentially supportable, any of that, and good luck on that because you're going to need it. That is not an actual defense. Of course, the religious take that on faith, which is why faith is so utterly meaningless. This is why when you put fanatical believers in two different religions in a room together, things get heated because both of them are going to do the exact same thing, and both of them are going to fail for the exact same reason. The Bible is true. No, the Quran is true. No, the Vedas are true. And that's why it often turns to violence, because they can't step back and recognize that none of their claims are remotely defensible. Faith means nothing. Stop making fools of yourselves.
One individual might accept this conclusion, believing that the burden of proof has been met due to their trust in the historical and spiritual authority of the Bible.
Then that person is an idiot. Just because you have people with piss-poor epistemic standards, that doesn't mean that the claim has been justified. This is one more place that the religious go wrong because they just assume things based on faith. They can't actually support things with objectively verifiable evidence. It's the evidence that we need, not the empty, emotionally derived claims. It doesn't matter what you really wish was true. It doesn't matter what seems to you. This is why I believe means absolutely nothing. Because we're not concerned with what you believe. We care what you can prove with rationally defensible evidence that anyone can see and examine and study for themselves without having to hold your beliefs first. But the religious think that everyone is just like them. In fact, lots of people do, and they're all wrong. Your assumptions based on faith and fifis mean absolutely nothing. You need to be able to justify it to someone else who holds none of your preconceptions, and these people can't do it. They don't even try.
However, another individual might reject this conclusion, arguing that the Bible is not a historically accurate or empirically verifiable source.
Which is true. Now, the person who made the original claim, they now have the burden of proof to back it up, such that the other person involved in the debate accepts that claim as supported. The debate then continues with each person making a claim, having to back it up. I don't believe you is not a claim, which is what he's trying to pretend here, and he's just wrong. You have not presented sufficient verifiable evidence to convince the other person involved that what you're saying is actually true. Do so, or I will continue to be unconvinced. That's how this works. It can't be that hard to understand, but sadly for the religious, it often is.
This example illustrates a simple scenario, but the principle aligns to more complex debates and discussions as well. It shows that two individuals can have different viewpoints on whether the burden of proof has been met.
Yes, they can. You go back and forth until both parties are convinced, or you give up when one person cannot defend their views sufficiently to convince the other party. That is how this works. Now, you don't have to like it, but it remains how this works. It doesn't mean that all debates are between rational people. Trust me, we've had enough debates with the religious to see that in action. That's why we are only convinced by objectively verifiable evidence, something that anyone can see and test for themselves without having to hold unjustifiable beliefs first. The failure here is on the religious side because they are relying on faith and we are not. Faith is worthless. Maybe you should stop professing it.
Now, this difference does not necessarily mean that one party can provide an irrational stance and meet the burden of proof. Rather, it shows the subjective nature of assessing what burden of proof is in philosophical discussions.
No shit! It's taken you, what, 6 videos so far to say that? Why do you keep repeating yourself? Because the only one making any positive claims here is your side. It's not atheists, or at least it's not me because I don't get to speak for anybody else like I said. If you find an atheist making a positive claim, great, you do you. Sitting on YouTube pretending that all atheists are doing it though, that's just you making a fool of yourself. That's really where this whole thing completely breaks down. Plus, you have to remember that most of these discussions are not really philosophical discussions. That's more of an academic thing. People debating on the internet are not that nuanced. So I don't think he has the slightest clue what the hell he's doing, do you?
Both parties are making claims and must provide supporting evidence for their positions.
If they are, in fact, making claims. But you have to back that up because you are, in fact, the only one here making that claim. So how do you defend your burden of proof? Well, from past experience, we know it's just by making more claims. But that doesn't make any of it true, because he's really just talking to himself and his own side here. Atheists are not part of this discussion at all. He doesn't want to talk to us. And if you read the comments on his own videos, he's just repeating his claims to his detractors, and they're all just laughing at him. Claims do not provide support for other claims. You need to get to the objective evidence, and he's not even trying. There's no effort going on here whatsoever. I believe it, but that doesn't make it true. That's why you need evidence, things that you can point to outside of your own head. And he's not even trying to do that. And that's pathetic.
But there is no universal standard to determine conclusively whether the burden has been met. The burden of proof serves as a crucial safeguard against accepting propositions without sufficient justification.
You mean like you do? And not just him, I'm assuming, but the religious in general who have no justification whatsoever for their own beliefs. Faith and fifis are not justification. I believe it doesn't mean anything. I have faith is completely useless. This is why you fail, because, as I said before, your burden of proof goes beyond proving things to other people. It's a way to verify that your own beliefs are rationally justified to yourself. And I'm willing to bet he's never done that. In fact, I'm willing to bet that no theist has ever done that in the history of forever. Even if they try, and most never do, but for the ones that do, they get to a certain point and they just throw up their hands and say, well, it sounds good to me. But that is not enough. It never has been, and it never will be, especially since everything they believe on faith is so pathetically worthless. All theists are like this, at least the ones that I've talked to, and that's been a lot. If you ever have to appeal to faith, your position is not sufficiently justified. If you have evidence, you don't need faith. And if you don't have evidence, then you don't have a worthwhile position. It's that simple.
In philosophical debates, especially those concerning the existence of a god or gods,
why does he keep making that a point? This goes for every debate, no matter what it's about. Debating invisible spooks in the sky isn't special. There's no especially here. That's why there is only one standard, even though the religious insist on making it two. Your beliefs don't get special consideration. They just don't. So I guess I cut him off in the middle of a sentence. Let's get back and see where this was going, okay?
This concept is vital and ensures that arguments are critically examined and supported by evidence, fostering rational discourse rather than ones based on unexamined beliefs.
Like yours. Because that's never going away. You have no evidence that you can present. If you had evidence, you wouldn't need faith. Faith is where the cowardly go when they can't find evidence or don't care enough to look. Because if you had evidence, you'd put in a better showing than you do. If you could show that any gods actually existed, you'd have a Nobel Prize. Why are there no Nobel Prizes for proving gods exist? Because nobody's ever done it. It's why always making empty claims and wishful thinking to get around the fact that you've got no evidence whatsoever, that's why it always fails. But I really believe it doesn't mean anything. Again, you need to be able to take yourself out of it and prove that your beliefs mean anything at all. Because your desires and your wishes and your dreams and your faith, all of that has to go away. The debate needs to take place based on objectively verifiable evidence alone. And you, my friend, have nothing. Nothing at all. You have come to the gunfight entirely empty-handed. Now you're just pretending that you've got an invisible gun, and you're just making yourself look stupid.
Both parties must demonstrate integrity and understanding to evaluate if the burden of proof has been met. Now, understanding the burden of proof is foundational for engaging in meaningful and rational discussions.
Seriously, he has repeated that line, or close to it, many times in just this video alone, but he's shown no understanding of what it actually means. First off, meaning doesn't mean anything, at least not in the sense that the religious tend to intend. Nobody cares what you like. Nobody cares if you get the emotional validation that you desire. This is completely irrelevant. The goal is to come to a more accurate and defensible understanding of the common reality that we all share, or think we share since, the problem of heart solipsism and all. How it makes you feel is entirely irrelevant. Nobody cares. Rational? Yes. What is rational? Based on or in accordance with logic or reason rather than emotions or feelings. No fee-fees required. Hell, no fee-fees allowed. It is making decisions based on factual evidence and sound judgment, and this is not something that the religious can do, at least not when it comes to their heartfelt beliefs. This is why they fail, and that's not exactly a surprise.
In philosophy, this principle helps ensure that the claims are substantiated and critically examined. By recognizing the importance of the burden of proof, we can contribute to more thoughtful and reasonable discussions about the belief and disbelief in the existence of a God.
Seriously, he's just saying the same thing over and over and over again. I don't just mean in different videos, I mean in the exact same video. Is there something wrong with this guy? I'm starting to wonder. So if he says it again, we're just going to fast forward, and honestly, I think the next video we're going to do is number 8 and then number 11, because I'm tired of explaining where he's wrong a dozen times over in the same video, and him just repeating his misconceptions verbatim. I mean, that is kind of the format, but he's been corrected on this over and over and over and over and over again in the comments on his own videos. And clearly, he not only doesn't get it, he just doesn't care. And that was actually the end of the video, so I didn't have to fast forward through anything. That was lucky. I am just going to jump to number 8 and then number 11, and if anyone has any specific requests after that, please let me know down in the comments, because I am really tired of sounding like a broken record. I think he's got some problems upstairs. Jonathan seems a little special, if you know what I mean. That's not meant to be insulting, but I see a lot of theist content that seems to be on the spectrum somewhere, because I think a lot of these people have problems. They have never learned how to grow up and deal with reality. Then, when they're called out on it, they just make excuses, just like Jonathan is doing in this series, because they can't deal with the fact that the problems, they're all on their side. They don't have the evidence to support their claims, but they just really, really want it to be true, so bald rationalizations ahoy! But that doesn't make it true, and it doesn't relieve their obligations. It just looks like they're trying to run and hide, and that's just pathetic. So anyway, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. If you want me to do any more of his content, especially like that response video if you ever did that, let me know that too with direct links, because I honestly can't be bothered to go and look on my own. This whole series has left a really bad taste in my mouth because he clearly doesn't care what is true. He's just trying to get away from having to support his own claims with any demonstrable evidence. Because he has none. And what the hell else is new? Hey, want to hear about the burden of proof? Yeah, no, neither do I. Especially not from the formerly named JCO journeys, but you know, sometimes we have to do things that we really don't want to do, and he's really as bad, if not worse, than Daniel King ever was, but we did him for a while at least, so there is that. Why do I do this stuff to myself? Better question is, why do I do this to you? Well, because if I'm gonna suffer, you might as well suffer too. Guess it's time to just suck it up and dive back in. So, the title of this is going to confuse some people because we just skipped over part 7. Wouldn't that make this part 7? I have no idea. When we get to the next one, it'll even be worse because we're going to jump to part 11 before we finish. So don't let it get your panties in a bunch or anything, just go with the flow and you'll be fine. This was specifically asked for, so hopefully JCO is going to do more than just ramble on about the same old tired nonsense that we've debunked 6 times so far. Keep your fingers crossed, as if that does anything, and let's go see.
In any discussion, especially those about the existence of a God, the burden of proof isn't a static responsibility.
There he goes again. This is true regardless of what you're talking about. God isn't a special circumstance. The burden of proof exists for everything all the time. If you make a positive claim about reality, you have the burden of proof to back it up, no matter what the hell you're talking about. And that's really all that needs to be said, yet he has mucked it up so badly for 8 videos so far, and I see no reason to think that he's ever going to change by the end. In fact, he's just repeated himself with minor, meaningless variations time and time again. It still hasn't made his channel any more successful because he is still, as I write this, at 229 subscribers, which is about where he was when we did the first video. But that one came out 10 months ago, or probably a year or more when this video actually hits the channel. Bet he's still around that number of subscribers then. He is failing miserably. And that's not exactly a surprise.
Instead, it often shifts back and forth between the participants as each side presents new claims, counters, or challenges.
Which you could have just said what I did and stopped flapping your lips. I mean, this is the stuff that I've been saying all along, isn't it? If you make a positive claim about reality, you have to back it up. It doesn't matter who makes the claim or what the claim is about, the responsibility is the same. That was easy, wasn't it? He could have made a 30-second video a year or so ago, and at least that would have been accurate. But no, he wanted to make God special, which is not the case. He wanted to portray atheists in ways that are not accurate because he's got an agenda in mind, and I figure he has very little self-control. Because who the hell makes a dozen videos, which is where this series ends up, saying the exact same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, without realizing that that's what you're doing? And these are not long videos. Most are only 3 to 4 minutes long, but the dumb is just so prevalent that it takes 20 to 25 minutes, sometimes longer, to respond to each and every one. And that's not my fault. It's his.
Understanding this dynamic is crucial for engaging in fair and balanced conversations. The burden of proof initially rests with the person making a claim.
No, it rests only on the person making the positive claim about reality. If we're having a conversation and I never once make a claim about the state of objective reality, then I never have the burden of proof. Every word out of my mouth could be, "Prove it," and I have not incurred any burden whatsoever. How can someone who spent so much time talking about this badly not understand that? I honestly don't know. And to predict where he's going to go with this, since he's gone there before, I figure he's going to say something like, if you ask somebody to prove it, then now you have a burden of proof somehow, which is absolutely not true. Or if you say that you don't believe the first person, then somehow you have to prove them wrong, which is also not true, because he has no clue what the hell he's doing. Big surprise there.
However, as conversation progresses, the other party may introduce counterclaims or challenges, effectively taking on a new burden of proof themselves.
And back to my very simplistic and absolutely accurate statement. If you make a positive claim about reality, you have to back it up. That's 14 words, and he's taken 30 seconds so far trying to say the exact same thing again and again. Does he think that his audience is really that stupid? I mean, if he had an audience, which I think it's obvious that he doesn't. The only people who are watching any of this are atheists, and by this time, even the atheists have given up because JCO doesn't care. He has proven that again and again. That's why I didn't want to talk to him when he came over and asked me to, and why nobody is engaging with his content anymore. In fact, let me go look at his most recent video. Hold on. Something about prayer, I guess, and you should try it out, that kind of thing. And virtually nobody's engaging with it, and most of the ones who are, they're just making fun of this idiot, and he can't figure out that he's just a laughingstock. And that's not much of a surprise either, is it?
This shift in dynamic is what keeps the conversation rational and ensures that all positions are adequately justified.
Only if the individual making the claim can meet their burden of proof, which, for the religious, they never can. It always comes down to, hey, it sounds good to me, or my book says a thing, or you have to have faith, and never justified with any kind of evidence or credible reason. Because nobody cares what your stupid book says, or how you feel, or what you want to be true. The statement about objective reality requires demonstrable evidence, and they simply don't have any. Because here's another thing. The whole point of the burden of proof is to convince the other party that what you're saying is true. But the religious don't care about that, do they? They only want to rationalize their way to their emotional preconceptions so that their own side thinks that they're right. Because this is never, ever, ever about convincing the people on the other side. It's only about making your side feel all warm and fuzzy inside, and that's stupid. They're not really having a debate with the opposition. They're only preaching to the choir. That's why they lose every single debate, except in the eyes of those existing followers who really want it to be true. They don't even know what they're supposed to be doing with any of this stuff. And that's pathetic.
Let's consider this example. Person A may state, I lack the belief that there is a God. Person B may respond with, why do you lack that belief? Person A's response could be, because I haven't seen evidence for a God.
which is just inviting person B to provide evidence such that person A can change their mind. Nowhere in there has person A made any positive claim about the state of reality. Nowhere has person B incurred a burden of proof either. Now, as we know, he thinks that saying, "I don't believe you," is a claim, which is completely ludicrous, but let's see if he goes the same place that he always has in the past. It's not like he hasn't had this explained to him a million times why he's wrong. He just doesn't care.
Person B can then state, what about the fine-tuning of the universe? Doesn't that suggest the existence of a designer?
And at that point, person B has the burden of proof to show that there is fine-tuning in the universe, and that said fine-tuning, if demonstrated, actually points to a designer. Person A is still off the hook. They have made no positive claims whatsoever. This is where the religious always go wrong, because they have all of these standard responses which they have never independently considered on their own. It's just gotta be true because someone on their side said that it was. Really? Back it up. They can't, and they don't even try. It's just gotta be true because, fifis, I guess. Sorry, but fifis don't matter in a debate. Maybe come up with something better, and I bet he won't be able to.
Person A's final response could be, I find natural explanations like the multiverse theory more compelling than the idea of a divine designer.
And he still doesn't have a burden of proof. He's stating opinion, not fact. He's saying what he finds more compelling, not what is actually true. He no more has to prove it to you than he has to prove that he prefers chocolate ice cream over pistachio. Because you notice what didn't happen here, right? Person B didn't back up their claim. They've given person A nothing to intellectually consider. If I had been person A, I would have been all over that immediately, and I'm sure that most of you would have been as well. And through tons of experience, I think we know that person B would have had absolutely nothing with which to respond rationally, because that's what religion does. They either invoke faith or they just run away. Maybe Jonathan is getting tired of Christians running away, I don't know, but that's a problem with Christians, not with the burden of proof.
In this conversation, the burden of proof shifts multiple times.
Nope. It only comes up once with the presumed theist making a claim that needs any support. Otherwise, it's just statements of opinion that do not carry a burden of proof. It's almost like Jonathan doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, right? Now, if person A had said the multiverse theory is true, then he would have certainly had to back that up. But that's not what happened in this example. I think we have to give Jonathan a little bit of credit here for not just presenting straw man claims from the atheist side, even though he treats them as if he did. Most atheists that I run into do talk like person A does in this example. He's just misrepresenting it all because he's desperately trying to get the burden of proof off his own shoulders where it absolutely belongs.
Firstly, person A starts by making a claim about their lack of belief, and they provide epistemic justification by stating they haven't seen evidence.
You're an idiot. Saying, "I don't believe you" is not a claim. This is pure desperation, as if anyone is surprised. It is only presenting the state of person A's internal critique, not saying that it's actually true out in the real world. And then he's just saying why that is his internal critique. Now, person B could present actual evidence for the existence of a God, which he didn't do, but I'm sure that we're going to get there in a second. The problem here is that Jonathan is an ignorant moron. He simply does not understand the basic criteria for determining a burden of proof. He just really wants the atheist to have it, and we don't. Your wishes and your dreams don't mean anything. I figure that's why he's getting no new subscribers, because even his own side can see through his ridiculous bullshit.
Then, person B challenges this by introducing a counterclaim about the fine-tuning of the universe, which shifts the burden of proof to them.
And that is the only claim that has been made. You don't have to justify your internal opinions about what convinces you. And yes, I have seen theists try to pull that and use it to their advantage by saying, "In my opinion, there is a God." which really it's still a claim about reality and it needs to be justified, but also nobody wants to play the silly theological word games, so they pretty much get ignored. Notice that person A did not say, I think that gods don't exist, which would have been a claim, but I don't buy it is not a claim. It is just a statement of their internal position. That is not a claim, and it has no burden of proof.
Person A then counters with an alternative explanation, the multiverse theory.
Which again is just opinion. He's not saying that any of this is actually true out in the real world, only that he finds it more compelling or more likely than the claim that person B made. Now, you might have an interesting conversation about that, but he's not going to go into it because he doesn't understand the actual process. He is so desperate to force the burden of proof onto atheists that he overlooks it on his own side. This is incredibly common, not just in religious circles where they are so familiar with their own claims that they don't even bother to question them. They believe it, so it's just got to be true, so there. And then they assume that because everyone has to be just like they are, that everyone else is going to accept it without question just like they do, and that's where they go wrong. I've lost count of the number of theists who completely get blindsided when asked to back up their own preconceptions. They can't do it, and they refuse to even try. In fact, they refuse to even acknowledge that they should. It's just got to be true because fifis. But that is not how this works.
Shifting the burden of proof back to them to justify why this explanation is more compelling.
Not really. Because you really do have to pay attention to the specific words used. He didn't say it was more compelling, period. He said it was more compelling to him. If the theist had said, I find the idea of fine-tuning to be more compelling to me, then there would be no burden of proof. Your opinion, whatever. Granted, that's not going to convince anybody else, so it's really just a waste of time, but if you're not trying to convince the other party, then it really doesn't matter, does it? If you don't care what the other party thinks, then you don't have to prove anything. And remember, the burden of proof is just a suggestion regardless. There's nobody with a gun to your head forcing you to comply. You can just walk away. But atheists don't have any vested interest in convincing the religious of anything, whereas theists, especially Christians, they have a direct commandment to convert the world. We don't do that. You are supposed to. Read your own damn book for once, because that would sure be nice.
Understanding when and how the burden of proof shifts is key to maintaining a productive conversation. Participants should be aware that introducing new claims or counterclaims mean they take on the responsibility to justify those positions.
And in your example, the only one that actually made a claim didn't do anything to justify it. Now granted, this is just a short made-up example, so we can only go so far, even though he spent about half of his video on it and misunderstood the content completely, because he tends to misunderstand just about everything, right? If you watch a lot of discussions on this, and I have, then you'll see that more often than not, it's the religious who are engaging in the burden of proof fallacy, where the claiming party pretends that their position is already proven, and thus they need to provide no support. You know, faith. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I think this only comes up because the religious are tired of being in the hot seat all the time, but let's be honest, they put themselves there voluntarily. If you didn't want to have the burden of proof, stop making claims about the state of objective reality that you can't back up. It's not difficult. Give it a shot.
Failing to do so can lead to an unbalanced discussion, where one side unfairly shoulders the burden while the other side avoids scrutiny.
Called it. Because this is not about fair. Life isn't fair. This is about holding valid epistemic positions. It doesn't matter what you like, it matters what you can prove. And if you can't prove it, then you shouldn't believe it. And you certainly shouldn't open your mouth and talk about it. But they've got that pesky Great Commission thing, right? That's not our fault. That's yours. If the religious would just shut up about their delusional beliefs, then they wouldn't have a problem. It's the fact that they can't that puts them in the hot seat. Stop blaming other people. You all did it to yourself.
Now, sometimes, in an attempt to win an argument, one party might keep raising the standards of evidence or changing the criteria for what counts as acceptable proof.
And that's another problem right there. Arguments aren't there to win. If that's what you're after, then you're an idiot, and there are an awful lot of idiots out there, right? The point of an argument like this is to come to a better justified understanding of reality, or of a position in contention. If both sides come to a better understanding, then everyone wins. That's why you need the evidence, because that's what tells you if your claims are rationally justified. It's funny how people don't get that. No, not really funny, stupid. Stupid is the proper word. But these people are just being competitive over absolutely nothing, and a lot of people are like that, aren't they? They just want to win. But there is no winning here. This is not, I'm going to convince someone that I'm right. It's about actually being right, and demonstrably so. That's why so many of these arguments go nowhere, because someone doesn't understand the point of it all. And it's usually the theist, isn't it? How sad is that?
Now, this is known as shifting the goalposts. It's important to recognize that this tactic and ensure that the conversation remains fair by holding each side accountable to the same standards of proof throughout the discussion.
And who does that? Almost always the theist. Strapping the goalpost to their back and running downfield is a standard theistic tactic, isn't it? They just want things to be true, so they're willing to go to almost any lengths to rationalize their blind faith because they just can't admit that they might be wrong. And then we ask for evidence, and they have none, and, Bob's your uncle. They don't understand the game, and they don't understand the rules, and they have no clue on the victory conditions. They just really want to believe, and that's stupid.
Overall, the burden of proof in a conversation is dynamic, often bouncing back and forth as claims and counterclaims are made.
And not when they're not. But he's desperately trying to make things into claims that are not claims in the first place. I'm not claiming that there are no gods. You're the one claiming that there are. Therefore, you have the burden of proof to back it up. The fact that you don't like that, that's your own damn problem, not mine. Stop making positive claims. But they can't do that, so they just whine instead. And that's what this entire video series has been. A whole lot of whining over things that are laughably not true because he desperately wants to get off the hot seat. Then stop being an idiot and climbing up on the stove of your own volition, because you're doing it to yourself.
By understanding this process, participants can engage in more balanced and fair discussions, ensuring that all positions are properly justified and that the conversation remains focused on rational discourse.
Which only happens if you take faith off the table, because faith is not rational. I figure that's something that no theist will ever get through their heads, because their beliefs are not based on facts, but on complete fantasy. They just really want it to be true, and that's dumb. Granted, look at who we're talking about, right? These are people without any kind of grasp on reality at all, and they don't want one. That's kind of sad, isn't it? So this is one of the requested videos, and sorry, but I'm not really seeing anything all that different about it. Now, I'm still obligated to do number 11, and I will, but after that, we're done. This series only goes to 12, although, to be honest, it's really one video repeated nearly verbatim a dozen times over, and that's not really a good thing. But hey, while you're here, what do you think about this outing? Let me know down in the comments. If I wasn't already on the hook for one more, I would already be done. Probably a couple of videos ago, but this is going to make a very long supercut if it actually ever comes out. I'm going to make sure it does just because, and hopefully that's going to make some people happy. If things keep going as they have, it's going to be over, I don't know, maybe 2.5 hours long, something like that. It's a long time to be saying the exact same thing over and over again, but look at the source. So I guess we'll be back with that last one at some unspecified point in the future. I keep forgetting I have to do these, or maybe I'm just subconsciously pushing them aside, but I promise I will do number 11 at some point. I really will. And of course, I keep my promises, as painful as they might be. So I'll just catch you all next time. Take care. One last time, I promise. I mean, seriously, how many times can we do the burden of proof where the theist is just repeating themselves on overdrive? He's made the exact same video 8 times so far, at least the ones that we've responded to, with no indication whatsoever that he's learned a damn thing. Because of course he hasn't. So let's get to it one last time, and then we can finally put this to bed. Finally, we come to the last of the JCO Journey videos that I promised to do, this one being number 11. Is there something more here than him just repeating himself over and over and over again? I certainly hope so. Yet he really comes off like a broken record, doesn't he? He's just projecting his own evidential failures onto others. And that's not really a good thing, is it? This is religion, though, so I suppose we really shouldn't be surprised. But one last time into the breach, my friends. Let's just get it done.
Talking about how atheists have a burden of proof, there seems to be a lot of critics based on my explanation.
That's because your explanation sucks. You keep saying the same thing over and over again after being directly corrected in the comments of your own videos because you don't really care about the truth at all, do you? I might not say if he had any reasonable excuses, but he doesn't. People tell him exactly where he's going wrong, and he comes back time and time again, repeating it all verbatim. There is no world in which he doesn't know that what he's doing is wrong, but he clearly doesn't care. That's why I figure that since we started looking at this series more than a year ago now, I don't think that he's picked up a single new subscriber at all. He might even have lost some. I don't know. I haven't gone back and looked. Because right now, as I'm writing this, he's sitting at 229 subscribers. Now that's nothing to be proud of, yet he's really practicing insanity, isn't he? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But let's see what else he's going to complain about, shall we? Because that'll be fun.
Whether you take the philosophical standard or your colloquial meaning of the word atheism. But the funny thing is, I'm willing to bet that the critics agree with me. They just don't like the words I'm using to explain my reasoning.
Because your reasoning sucks. Apparently, you think that you can just assert your way to victory, and you're just wrong. We all know that he wants everyone to be just like he is, and that is not how this works. It's where a lot of apologists go wrong, whether they do it on purpose, which I figure a lot do, or whether they're just ignorant, but they're not really talking to atheists at all, are they? In fact, they seem surprised when atheists show up in their comments. They don't want us hanging around because they're really only after an echo chamber. They only want to talk to people who already believe. You know, the people who are giving each other religious blowjobs because they all want the exact same thing. Unfortunately, they didn't bother to consult with the people that they're trying to smear because we aren't afraid to correct blatant misconceptions. But I'm sure that JCO here just wants to be the victim, which that just isn't going to fly. It's not going to stop him, of course, but hey, whatever. We'll make fun of him again and again and again. So I guess it's back to the insanity already in progress.
Try to answer these 4 questions. If I state that God exists, and someone asks for why or for my reasons, am I expected to respond if I want to have an honest conversation about it?
Yes, absolutely. You have made a positive statement about reality, that a God actually exists, and therefore you have the burden of proof to back it up to anyone who doesn't agree. Hell, you should be able to do it even to the people who do agree. You need to justify your claims with evidence, and if you can't, which we all know that you can't, then no one has any reason to take you seriously. So go ahead and do that. That's where the problems come in because they simply can't do that. Oh, when talking to other theists, they can make the same kind of comforting emotional appeals that they've been trying for centuries, but once they get out of their own safe spaces, out into the real world where everybody isn't on their side, that kind of bullshit just doesn't fly. They don't know what to go and do with themselves when people don't just roll over and go, well, of course, that's gotta be true. So, as JCO has been doing, they just shift the burden of proof and insist that the people on the other side have to prove them wrong when they have never proven themselves right in the first place. And that's kind of a problem, wouldn't you say?
If I state that God exists, and someone asks for why or for my reasons, but I don't want to discuss it any further, am I still expected to answer?
If you don't want to be laughed at, then yes. If you don't care, then you do you, I guess. This is what we see when the theists come out to preach. But otherwise, they just ignore their detractors. They make no friends among the atheists at all. Not that I suspect they care. And we just have another idiot that we can make fun of for cause. But I've been saying this since the very beginning. Just because you are reasonably expected to meet your burden of proof, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to. You can walk away. Nobody really cares. But you will have done nothing to justify your beliefs, and the people who you leave behind, they're just going to think that you're a moron, because you will be. But if you want to do that, by all means, go right ahead. You have my express permission. It just doesn't help your side.
If I state that you lack the belief in a God, and I ask why or for your reasons, are you expected to respond if you want to have an honest conversation about it?
If you're having a conversation, sure. But it's not a burden of proof because you have made absolutely no positive claims about the state of objective reality. You've just said, I don't buy it. I can say that about a ton of things. Bigfoot, alien abductions, pineapple on pizza. I have no burden of proof for any of those things because I'm not saying that my position is true. Hell, I don't even have a position. I'm just saying I don't believe you. Nothing more. There is a fundamental difference here that JCO doesn't seem to understand. Or maybe he does, and he's just purposely choosing to ignore it. I really have no clue.
If you state that you lack the belief in a God, and I ask why or for your reasons, but you don't want to discuss it any further, are you still expected to answer?
Same thing goes here as it does with the theist example, but the atheist still doesn't have a burden of proof, whereas the theist does. The difference comes down to that positive claim that they make, and that's one thing that he absolutely refuses to discuss. It's the difference between someone who says there are no gods and someone who says, yeah, I don't believe you. Those are two inherently different statements, but JCO has spent a bunch of videos trying to conflate the two, and you can't do that. I mean, he can and he does, but you can't do so rationally, not that I suspect he really cares. So once again, we see that the theist is the only one that actually has a burden of proof here because the theist is the only one that is making a positive claim about reality. Asking the atheist to prove anything when they have made absolutely no positive claims is like demanding that someone prove that they like vanilla over chocolate ice cream. It's just stupid.
I'm pretty sure your responses will be yes, no, yes, no.
Nope. I mean, it would be yes, no, 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 because he still doesn't understand the situation that he has placed himself into. He fundamentally doesn't understand the burden of proof. Actually, it should probably be yes, yes, no, no, since the theist in both instances is making a positive claim and the atheist never is. But I'll let the second one go because they're retreating to their safe space and I have no means whatsoever to force them to behave rationally. I mean, I never do, but I can at least point and laugh when they don't do it out in public. Now, as I said, if he had the atheist saying, there are no gods, then yes, the atheist would likewise have a burden of proof to back up their own positive claims. But that's not what's happening here, is it? So JCO is just completely clueless. What a surprise!
I've been saying this the whole time. If I claim that God exists, and someone asks why or requests my epistemic justification, am I expected to respond to fulfill my burden of proof if I want to have an honest conversation about it?
Absolutely. You made a claim, you are expected to back it up. But here's another thing. If you had said, I believe that gods exist, or a God exists, or whatever, then you don't necessarily have a burden of proof. You are just expressing an opinion. Likely, you will be asked to back it up regardless, because if you can't rationally justify your beliefs, then you have no intelligent reason to hold them in the first place, and likely the discussion will just end. But you don't have a rigorous burden of proof because you have made no demonstrable positive claim about reality. And yes, I have seen theists try to use that to get around their burden, and generally that just means that they sit alone because there's no point in having a conversation with them at all. I generally don't bother with those people because what's the point? You believe whatever you want to believe. I'll be over there talking to the people actually making positive claims. Have fun!
If I state that God exists, and someone asks why or requests my epistemic justification, but I don't want to discuss it any further, am I still expected to fulfill my burden of proof?
Expected? Yes. Are we surprised when you just walk away? No. But that's generally what happens in every religious conversation anyhow, isn't it? Either the theist gets bored of having to defend themselves and they just run for the hills, and that happens a lot, or they never had any intention to do so in the first place, and they're already hoofing it for Schenectady. Or the atheist gets bored that the theist isn't going anywhere, and they just take off and do something more interesting. Never once does it get to the point that the theist adequately supports their claims, because I think we all know that they can't do that, can they?
If you claim that you lack the belief in a God, and I ask why or request your epistemic justification, are you expected to respond to fulfill your burden of proof if you want to have an honest conversation about it?
No, because, once again, I have not made a positive claim that needs justification. I'm just saying I don't buy the idea. I don't have to prove why I don't buy the idea, although, if you ask, I will certainly tell you. But I have no burden of proof because I have made no positive claim. See, he's really looking for fairness, but this isn't about being fair. It's about requiring people making positive claims to show that their positive claims are actually defensible. I have no positive claims in my atheism, thus I don't have to defend anything. This is just trying to get off the hot seat that you have voluntarily put yourself on. If you don't want to simmer, get the fuck off the stove. This is something that they do to themselves, and then they refuse to acknowledge it because their religion insists that they do it. If they just shut their damn mouths, they wouldn't have a problem, would they? I never go up to a random stranger and tell them that I don't believe in any gods. It just doesn't happen. Yet the religious can't shut the hell up, can they? They just really want their cake, and they really want to eat it too, and it doesn't actually work that way. If you want to share your faith, great, but you damn well better be able to back it up, and as we all know, they simply can't. So that's a them problem.
If you claim that you lack the belief in a God, and I ask why or request your epistemic justification, but you don't want to discuss it any further, are you still expected to fulfill your burden of proof?
Same thing goes, and I don't feel the need to go over it again because, hey, I'm getting really tired of repeating myself. No positive claim is no burden of proof. And that's about all I have to say on that.
Now replace state with claim, epistemic justification with your reasons for it, and add fulfill the burden of proof to emphasize the point.
That doesn't change anything. This, as is no surprise, is just a word game on JCO's part. But then again, he's really been doing that since the first video, hasn't he? He expects everyone to be just like he is, and we're not. He's looking for fairness, and it just doesn't exist. This is like the 98-pound weakling on the football field looking at the 300-pound linebacker bearing down on them and suddenly wanting fair treatment. No, asshole, you put yourself on the field of your own free will, just shut up and accept your destruction. But they don't want to do that, do they? because today they are that 98-pound weakling that is losing virtually every encounter, and they're tired of getting their theological asses kicked. So they whine about it instead of realizing that they've hopped up on the stoves themselves, and they shouldn't be surprised when they start smelling smoke, because they did it to themselves.
It's like saying I provide evidence and I provide evidence for my claim means the same. But apparently I'm wrong for not using your definitions.
Because our definitions are the correct ones. I mean, if you really want to make up your own, go right ahead and we'll just stand there and laugh at you. Because if you can't agree on standardized definitions of things, then you can't have a coherent conversation on anything. So yes, there needs to be some kind of common definition that all parties agree to, otherwise we're all just talking past each other, and what's the point in that? This is where we have to remember that they don't want to talk to us at all. They want to keep it all in the family, using atheists as straw men so that they can feel superior to someone else when they're the ones losing all the time. It's not our fault that your silly book commands you to share your faith. We didn't write 1 Peter 3:15. That you insist on following it, that's kind of your problem, not ours. So stop complaining to us. You keep doing all this stuff to yourself.
Now, in the end, our disagreements often stem from differences in terminology rather than underlying principles we both value.
Which is why I very clearly define my terms up front in a lot of videos, because I want it to be clear exactly where I'm coming from. In a live discussion, people have to agree before the discussion happens, because otherwise, why should you do it at all? That's the whole point. Otherwise, you're just talking past each other and wasting everyone's time. And you notice that the religious, they don't want to do that, right? Because they love to use word games and fallaciously swapping terms in the middle of a conversation because they are not honest interlocutors. We're going to use the word faith for this here and for that there, with no indication that I'm changing definitions anywhere in between. That kind of stuff doesn't fly. And that's why, if you go back to the very first video in this series, I said exactly what the burden of proof is, and I have consistently said that the whole way through. If I was having a conversation with him in person, it never would have lasted this long, because he's just wrong.
Like importance of providing reasons and engaging in honest discourse.
I don't see any honest discourse here at all, sorry. All I see is yet another theist trying desperately to shift the burden of proof because they cannot meet it on their own. But sure, if you want, I would be more than happy to tell you why I lack belief in your or any gods. I have never had a problem with that. You have to produce evidence to justify your belief that a god or gods exist. Where do you think that's going to fall apart? Because you get two guesses and the first one doesn't count. That's the equality that he doesn't want to have. I'm not claiming that no gods exist. I'm just saying that I find no good reason to think that any do, and I can justify that until the cows come home. All I have to do is say, please present your evidence to me, and when they fail, I still will see no good reason to believe that what they're saying is true. And he can't do anything because he has no evidence. Just because he likes to believe it, that doesn't mean that it's true. So sure, let's do this. Go right ahead. I think we know which side would chicken out first. And it's not mine.
By focusing on these shared values, we can foster more productive and meaningful conversations, even if we don't agree on the stacked definitions.
Wrong, wrong, wrong. You have to agree on what you're trying to demonstrate, or you can't demonstrate anything. I'm not going to let you play word games, and I'm not going to let you act fallaciously. That's all you've been doing for, 8 videos so far, repeating the same nonsense over and over and over again, because everyone in your comments is just laughing at you, and for good reason. There is something seriously wrong with this guy, and I trust no one is surprised. Well, that was it. The last of the JCO videos that we're going to do, and honestly, I figure we did about, I don't know, 7 videos too many. I didn't think that one person could repeat themselves this many times, but I guess I should have known better, right? He's out there having a conversation with himself. He's certainly not responding to any of his detractors in his own comments, and he's certainly not doing it remotely intelligently. He's just doubling down on his own stupidity until everyone with a brain's eyes roll into the back of their heads. This is not a good way to have a conversation, is it? But he doesn't want to have a conversation. He just wants to convince the already religious how right he was all along, while being ridiculously wrong constantly. That's not really much of a surprise, is it? So anyhow, what did you think? Did we waste our time on JCO? Let me know down in the comments now that you've seen the whole thing. This is really one thing that I'm not going to miss, the constant lying and repetition of already disproven claims. Because they really want it to be true, but of course that doesn't make it true. I don't care what you want. I care what is demonstrably true in the real world, and they aren't even trying to do that. They're certainly not trying to prove it. They just really like the idea. And they don't learn their lessons either, which is why you have to show up week after week after week and do it all over again, because they're not listening. And if they're not listening, then why do we bother? Because as we all know, they just don't care. And I don't think they're going to start caring anytime soon. That's kind of pathetic, isn't it? But really, what can we expect?